And we just hit record again. So again, on your end, you should have something there to give me permission to record. Like I said, I will create this evening, I will create our own YouTube channel and put today's recordings in it. And then I'll share that link with you guys tomorrow. So John, there's another good resource to another good way to make sure you get the information. And then never forget that I'm available. So I'm here to help as well.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Okay, so let's see. Kimberly, thank you. So before we get back into it, I just wanted to pull up, and this is Triad MLS. So it may look similar to yours. John, my firm is actually a member of Triad and Canopy, so I have access to both, but Triad's what I know the best. We just picked up Canopy because we do a lot with builders and new construction. And we have like developments down in like Lexington and Davidson County. So it kind of could be right on that. So we make it up to available to all agents. But anyway, looking just in the Triad MLS, and we were talking about how when you look at a listing, if you're a seller sub-agent, you're working with a buyer customer. Seller sub-agent, you're working with an unrepresented buyer. And now the question is, can I show this buyer customer, this unrepresented buyer, a listing they want to see in 123 Main Street? And the answer to that question lies within the MLS, you guys. So a couple of things to look at. Somewhere in your MLS, you have this kind of add edit button where you can add a new listing. And we're not going to go through and add a new listing, but I am going to show you where it starts. And in the MLS, what you're probably going to see, and this is so, can I make this big? Yeah. You guys see where it says agency type? And then we got to select what type of agency is allowed with this listing. Will we allow buyer agency? Will we allow sub-agency? Or will we allow both buyer agency and seller sub-agency? So again, you're a buyer, you're working with an unrepresented buyer. And you go into MLS in 123 Main Street, and under agency type, it says buyer agency only. Can you, the seller sub-agent, bring your buyer to this transaction? Can you bring your buyer? No, because it says what type of agency allowed? Buyer agency. So we need to be looking in MLS to see those specifics. John, I know Canopy MLS, it actually goes in and says, how much are you willing to offer a buyer's agent? How much are you willing to offer a seller sub-agent? Ours doesn't have that split. Ours just pretty much says, what agency type are we willing to consider? What agency type are we willing to work with? From your point of view, and I'm just pulling up, here's our new listings in the last 24 hours, and I'm just going to randomly pull up this one in Mount Airy. You have a buyer that calls on 169 Barker Lane in Mount Airy. The first thing you're going to want to do is come to the MLS and see what type of agency they allow. And again, we can see here, what are they looking for? Buyer agency. So as a seller sub-agent, if you're ever acting as a seller sub-agent, first off, your buyer understands you may be limited to the number and the amount of properties you can show them. You have to have permission to get into the home. And where you get permission, how you get permission is by looking at your MLS and seeing what type of agency is allowed. You can also see what type of compensation they're going to offer you if you bring this seller a ready, willing, and able buyer. So again, if this isn't what your firm expects to collect, then we have the buyer make up the difference. So knowing what's in the MLS, making sure you're knowing how to proceed. Welcome back. So we've talked about, the big four: omissions and misrepresentations, and various things that we have here. Again, it's all about mishandling material facts. And I'm telling you guys, material facts are showing up in the disciplinary actions, like maybe not every month, but they're showing up a lot. So I feel like as much time as we spent talking about material facts in CE, as much time as we're spending talking about it post and pre, as much as we're seeing it as a disciplinary action, I encourage you guys to handle material facts properly. How many of you are, I know y'all are newly licensed, but how many of y'all are familiar with the real estate market over the last couple of years? Heavy sellers market. Buyers, it's tough to buy a house the last couple of years, isn't it? Did anybody try to buy a house in the last couple of years? Any of you try to? You did? Okay, my heart goes out to you because it wasn't easy the last few years, was it? So I think part of the consequences where we are today as a state with material facts, it's not that we're not trying to do our job as agents. It's just the fact that we have been in a very swift moving market. I mean, y'all seeing how houses going under contract hours after they're activated, right? We're coming out of that. We're still in a seller's market. It's not as strong and it's not as severe, but it is still a seller's market. But I think the important thing to remember, you guys, no matter the market, no matter how swift it's moving, no matter what's going on, that doesn't negate our responsibilities to do our jobs and explain agency, explain material facts, explain the contracts. Don't tell yourselves you don't have time. And I think that's the point that we need to understand. No matter how fast things happen, we still have to slow down and making sure we're doing our jobs to best protect and represent our clients. Questions on our material facts and mishandling our material facts and misrepresentation and omission, etc. Any questions on that so far, or from that so far? Okay. I updated some page numbers while we were at lunch. I'm not sure that I got the whole way through today or not, but as of right now on this slide, the page numbers are current. So at least I got that much for you. I'll try to get all these done and get our PowerPoints reloaded into the online learning system so you have the page numbers. But I made it through, this is slide 85. I made it through 155, getting page numbers updated. So I got us most of the way through the afternoon. Tatiana, our digital subscriber, you're looking for the big category. If it's not unfair, deceptive trade practices, the big category that we're under in the digital manual is maybe agency duties under license law, something like that. But once you find the misrepresentation and the omission, the Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act is around that area at the end of that. I look forward to the day where they can give me page numbers in the digital, but for right now, we just got to find it.
Okay, thank
like
you.
I said, you'll be well done with post before that happens. So it does not affect you, except you can tell your friend that just got their license that they may have page numbers in the digital. That's what you can do about that. Okay, so the Unfair Deceptive Trade Practices Act, picking back up on page 173. This is consumer protection. I think that everything we need to know about this act is in the name. We're trying to protect the consumer from unfair and deceptive practices. This takes everybody back to their duty. Nobody, the agent, the seller, the buyer, nobody has a golden ticket to lie. The seller doesn't have to disclose, but they're not allowed to lie. And that's all covered, and me and you keeping us honest as well. That's all covered under this Unfair Deceptive Trade Practices Act. In addition to disciplinary action by the Real Estate Commission and possibly going to court, we have to follow other federal and state acts. So if you're found guilty under the Unfair Deceptive Trade Practices Act, this could invalidate the sales contract. It could make the sales contract invalid. Obviously, this would have to happen in a court of law. But if it's found that us or the seller, some owners, lied, basically, we could be looking at it invalidate. Practices covered under this act is given a misleading opinion or false inducement, false information, failure to disclose a material fact. An omission could be seen as an unfair and deceptive trade practice. Any misleading advertising, again, pay attention to that puffing. Make sure that your opinion doesn't cross the fine line into a flat out lie. Make sure your chat GPT doesn't pump out incorrect information. And then misrepresentation, trying to prevent all parties from lying. If anybody, broker and or seller, is found guilty under the Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act, they could be entitled to 3 times to treble the damages. So you take the amount of damages awarded to the injured party and you times it by 3. Ouch. Let's talk about specifically, remember this section is about working with sellers. So we're going to start getting into specifically into sellers. And one of the first things to understand with working with sellers is caveat emptor. Who can remind me what caveat emptor means?
Buyer beware.
The buyer.
Buyer beware. This is fun to do around Halloween, but it's August. So buyer beware. North Carolina is a caveat emptor state, which means the seller doesn't have to disclose much. Caveat emptor states mean that the onus, the responsibility to learn about the item being sold, in this case, the property, is not on the seller to disclose. The responsibility to learn is on the buyer. And this is why we encourage them to do their inspections and investigations during due diligence. We can almost kind of think of due diligence as a way to offset caveat emptor. You guys remember back in pre-licensing when you learned about caveat emptor and due diligence. Sometimes we like to get upset. Due diligence isn't fair to the seller. I kind of agree with that. Is caveat emptor fair to the buyer? Not really. So how do we make it fair to the buyer? We give them this period of time to learn about the property, make the decision if they want to purchase it or not. If we were in a seller disclosed state, I don't know that we would have due diligence. A lot of states don't have due diligence. North Carolina is rare in that. So caveat emptor, the onus to learn about the property is on the buyer. When the buyer hires an agent, we take on this responsibility with them. So as their agent, we take on that burden. Like I said, the seller's not required to disclose much. There's like a very small number of things that the seller's required to disclose, and we will talk about those. But outside of those very small number of things, the seller doesn't have to disclose much. But they don't have this golden ticket to lie. Nobody's ever allowed to lie. If the seller, they could be held liable to the buyer. They could be held liable to the buyer after the transaction if they engage in fraud. Fraud is a lie with intent. You can misrepresent and lie something. Maybe you meant to do it, maybe you didn't. You just misrepresented it. If you do it with intent, and you're hoping that your lie is going to cause the other party to act, now we're talking fraud. That's up for the judge usually to decide if it's fraud or misrepresentation, either one or a lie. Some sellers on occasion have tried to encourage the buyer to waive the home inspection. Sellers don't like home inspections, do they? Home inspector's job is to go in the property and find all the problems with the home, right? With the property. Sellers don't like that. And so they may try to think that they're going to encourage the buyer. I'll accept a lower priced offer if you agree not to have a home inspection. Is that in the best interest of the buyer? I don't have to disclose, but I'm trying to talk you into not getting a home inspection. Wow, you're pretty much buying a house. A house. blind at this point. Does that seem fair? No. So the seller, again, could be held liable if they try to encourage or induce the buyer to waive the home inspection. Or if they don't provide the RPOs or the MOG. We're going to talk about the RPOs. We'll define those. Again, that could be an out for the buyer. If it's found that the seller lies on the RPOs or the MOG, then that could be reason for the seller or for the buyer to take action after settlement. Homes in North Carolina are sold as is. So not only does the seller not have to disclose much, what do they have to fix? What do they have to repair? Goodness, this just seems more and more one-sided. Are you telling me the seller doesn't have to disclose and they're not required to fix anything? That's exactly what I'm telling you. As is, particularly when we use standard form 2T. There's a very important sentence in standard form 2T, offer to purchase and contract, that says this property is being sold in its current condition. And that's pretty much just saying as is. If you use another contract, you may or may not see similar provisions to that, but in 2T, by the way, for those of you that have not done 302 yet, contracts and closings, when you get to that, you're pretty much going through the offer to purchase and contract word by word. So you have that to look forward to. Guys, please remember, caveat emptor, properties being sold in its current condition, none of that affects my duty to disclose material facts. We always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. Skipping ahead just a bit, we'll come back and get that, but skipping ahead just a bit for now. Page 186. Tatiana, you might be underneath category. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll find liabilities and consequences of the agent's breach of duty. So what happens if you do violate your duties as an agent? If you do violate license, law, and commission rule, if you mishandle material facts, well, there's several things that could go down. First off, you could face disciplinary action by the real estate commission. They could suspend your license, maybe for X amount of time. Maybe it's 3 months, 6 months, 2 years. They could revoke your license. If they revoke your license, they're going to take it back. They could also reprimand your license, kind of a slap on the wrist. Don't do that again. Maybe they make you take an extra CE class or something just to get some further training and education. But they have the power. Understand, disciplinary actions by the commission are handled on a case-by-case basis. And bottom line, guys, what it comes down to is how badly did you harm their public? Remember, their number one purpose, their main purpose, is to protect the public from us. So if we harm their public, that's when we're going to face disciplinary action. The injured party could take you to court. If you're going to get sued or fined, that's where it's going to come from, is the court. So they could take civil action. They could take criminal prosecution. The court could also require you to basically pay back your commission if you've received it. So again, why are pre and post licensing so important? Because we don't want to see you guys here. When you get into 303, you're going to go through the disciplinary action process, what that looks like, what happens if you do get a letter of inquiry, that whole process and how that looks. So for those of you that haven't done 303, you have that to look forward to. Questions, comments? Our agency agreements are a bilateral contract, which means both parties have duties and obligations to each other. So our agency agreement spells out the firm's role to the client, but it also has to spell out the client's firm to the role. to the firm. What did I just say? The client's role to the firm. Is that better? Okay. So it's a two-way street, and they have to spell out duties and responsibilities to each party. So our agency agreement says, well, what duties does the principal owe me? The principal owes me the duty to act in good faith. Let's say, for example, you enter into a listing agreement with a seller to sell the seller's house, but the seller declines every single showing request to come through. Are they acting in good faith? It's awfully hard for me to sell your house if I can't get a buyer in the front door. Now, what if the seller's sick and the whole house comes down with the COVID? Can we stop showings for 3-5 days? Well, of course, nobody wants to go in there. So I'm not talking about those extreme circumstances. Every once in a while, my favorite showing instructions of all times. And guys, I probably saw this. This would have been back in 2002, 2003. And the reason I know this is because we didn't always have a centralized showing system. So if you want to show, you had to call the firm to schedule the appointment. And back in those days, I was the one that answered those calls to schedule the appointments. And I saw showing instructions once that said, new baby and dog may bite. What kind of baby are we talking about here? But what if you have a new baby that doesn't bite? You just have a new baby. You have a new baby, and baby's nap time is from 1 to 3. Can we stop showings during that time? Can we say no showings from 12:30 to 3:30 so baby and mom can take a nap? Of course we can. So we're not saying pockets of showings or limited times that don't work. We're saying never allowing somebody into the home. They've got to act in good faith. The other duty they owe us is to ensure we're getting compensation. I did not just say to pay us. Maybe they're going to pay us, maybe they're not. What their duty is to make sure that we get paid. So buyer's agency agreement, when the listing firm or the seller pay me, my buyer doesn't owe me any money because they ensured that I got paid. The principal also has duties to the third party, so the other side of the transaction. And again, bottom line, nobody, buyer, seller, nobody can lie. So we need to make sure that the parties to the principals, the third parties, if our actions were instructions from the seller, and maybe we had no way to verify otherwise, my little red flag didn't go up, and we have no way to verify otherwise, the principal could be held liable for my wrongful conduct as well. Again, this is going down to a court of law. This is going to be up to a judge. And probably questions we're going to get from the judge is, could you have found out? Did your little red flag go up? I hope one thing that as you're getting started, I know some of you aren't affiliated yet, but one thing for you guys to consider as you're getting started, I'm a big fan of checklists. I have listing checklists, I have buyer checklists, I have contract to closing checklists, I have closing checklists. Anybody have checklists yet? You started your checklist lists? Checklists, one thing it does, well, obviously it helps my little brain to remember that I do everything. But another thing a checklist does, it shows that I treat all parties the same across the board. What I do for one seller, I need to do for all. What I do for one buyer, I need to do for all. And one way I can have that is having my checklist in each and every single one of my transactional files. And if your checklists add up, showing that you did your work, you asked the questions, you did what you were supposed to do, that may help should you get in trouble. So let's go ahead, set your chats to private. I've got a few questions to you guys, for you guys. So we can set those chats just to me. And if you guys are ready, So tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. Man. It's okay. We got it now. Man. I feel like I'm missing one. North Carolina, the doctrine of caveat emptor. Yeah, it's still intact for the owner, for the property owner. Again, this is our biggest, this is where we butt heads probably the most with sellers. The seller can hide behind caveat emptor. The broker has to follow license law and commission law. Questions on this one? Okay, let's do that again. Private chat, A, B, C, or D. Brian? I think I just saw a flaw in my own question. Up for debate, so it says the principal owes the agent the duty to act in good faith. What do we think about that? Do they owe the duty to act in good faith? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs up for no. Act in good faith? Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So right away, we can eliminate B and D, right? Because we agree A is, our first one is true. Payment of compensation. Well, I guess that depends on how we interpret that, right? And I totally agree. And I may need to adjust that question. They're not necessarily the one paying me. As we just said, they want to ensure that we get paid. So technically, or what they think the answer is C. I absolutely would agree with A as well, because they may not be the one paying me. If I change that one word to ensuring my compensation, now we can all agree that the answer is C. So that's a flaw in the question, but as long as we get the point, that's the important thing to me. So we know our agency doesn't follow who pays me. My loyalty is to who hires me. Their loyalty to me is to make sure I get paid compensation. I get paid commission. Whether they're the ones doing it or not. Okay, let's try one more. A, B, C, or D. So an agent who breaches the fiduciary duties may be subject to all the following except. One place we will not get disciplined by is NAR. Tricky, I know. The Real Estate Commission will regulate our license. There's a lot of governing bodies that we look up towards too, right? We got the Real Estate Commission. National Association of Realtors isn't a governing body. They're a membership. They don't regulate our license, anything at all. They just, and there's a state level referred to as the North Carolina Association of Realtors. And again, that's a voluntary membership just to provide us tools to assist. So NAR isn't going to touch our license. NAR just allows us to be a realtor and gives us extra tools to help the public. Questions, comments? So when we started this morning, we introduce you guys to license law and commission rule. And you've probably noticed on our PowerPoints, we've had several license law 93A and 58A pop up. I have them on the PowerPoints as a reference. Now, you're not gonna be tested on what rule is on disciplinary action. You're not gonna be tested on the specific numbers. Again, by the time we're done, I'll show you guys where you can always access those. There is one commission rule that I think you guys should sit down and read. And when you're done reading it, I think you should sit down and read it again. And once you've read it the second time, you know what? Just for fun, let's read it again. Are we getting the importance of this commission rule? The commission rule I think we need to focus on is 58A.0104, which addresses our agency agreements and disclosure. We'll show you in just a minute. Actually, I may do it now so I don't forget. Where you can access this, because this is your number one, the first source, the first place to go to on how do I handle agency, how do I handle disclosure, what do I need to do, what do I need to know? It all starts here, 58A.0104. So let me go out of the PowerPoint just for 1 second. And a couple resources here. If we go into the online learning system to start. I thought I saw it here earlier. Evidently, I did not. All right, never fear. I got another. Could have sworn I saw it because I looked for it this morning to make. Oh, there it is right there. Section 1. So in the online learning system, section 1, the first thing right in front of me is 58A.0104 for you guys. So you have it here. It's easy. You can access it. It's only about 2.5 pages. However, it's rule. Have you ever sat down and tried to read rule? This is not going to be the most entertaining piece of material that you've ever read. However, we need to make sure we understand it. So if breaking it up into sections, into snippets, helps you digest it, then please feel free to break it up. What happens when you leave this class, when you finish post and you leave Carolina School of Real Estate? Now you're in the real world all on your own, and you want to know how you can access 58A.0104 or any license law or commission rule for that matter. We're going to start by going to the Real Estate Commission's website, ncrec.gov. There's a couple different places you can find this. They have it several areas of the website, but probably one of the easiest to remember. If we scroll down on the home page, you guys see I have a link here for licensed law and rules on the home page. Before we click on this link, also note any upcoming changes to laws and rules, approvals, changes they make open for public opinion, that kind of thing. So any updates you're going to also be able to find here. You guys can also subscribe to receive an email from the commission when they're proposing and deciding to change a law or rule. So you can do all that here on the home page. If we go to this link, license law and rule, you can see we got chapter 93A and we got chapter 58. So you got your license law and commission rule. And again, when you click on this, it takes you to the actual 58A as we patiently wait for it to load. There it is. So now you can see all of 58A, the various sections. And again, there's 58A.0104 about agency agreements and disclosure. So it's important that we're always looking at the current and most current and up to date, but also that we know where and how to access it. So when we are out in the real world, we know where to go, where to find it. So homepage is a great place to start. Okay, so let's talk. We're going to talk about our agency agreements. We're going to look at our listing agreement and our buyer's agency agreement specifically and talk about those. But for now, let's talk about our agency disclosure. Working with real estate agents. This takes a while to get good at. Though some of you have had transactions so far, right? The first time you did working with real estate agents, was it perfection in every way? Nobody else has ever done working with real estate agents as good as you did the first time you did it. Yeah, no, did it come out bumpy and awkward? You're mandatory. Got to sign sales transactions, right? You're just kind of spitting words out. So after a while, you'll get I get your little elevator speech down pat, and you'll get good at this. Give yourself some time, give yourself some practice. Practice doing your agency disclosure elevator speech in the mirror, practice with a family or a friend, practice, because the more you do it, the better, the more natural it's going to be, and the better it's going to work. So the big question is, why must we do agency disclosure? Well, the reason we do our agency disclosure, there's primarily two reasons. Making sure that the consumer understands that we don't have any kind of agency relationship. This is not a contract. As a matter of fact, that's the first sentence on the form. This is not a contract. This is a disclosure. Remember earlier when we were talking about disclosure of material facts, you guys said to tell, to inform. Now what we're doing is informing the consumer about my agency status. Where do I stand in this transaction? The other big piece of this form, it lets the consumer know that I don't owe you confidentiality until and if you decide to hire me. If you never hire me, I don't owe you confidentiality. Please understand, working with real estate agent disclosure is a consumer form. This is not a customer form. This is not a client form. This is a consumer form. And this is what we're doing first to decide, are you going to be my client or my customer? This happens before all of that. We have a duty to disclose our agency status with all buyers and sellers, in other words, in sales transactions, no later than first substantial contact. Kimberly, you pretty much ignore this section, except we need you to pass a test on this. Once you get done with this, you don't have to worry about this anymore, do you? Because this isn't for a lease. This isn't for landlords and tenants. It's for sales transactions only. So we just got to get you through the test, Kimberly. Does that sound good? And then you probably never hear working with real estate agent disclosure again. You lucky duck. No, I'm just kidding. You may find some property managers have a disclosure. That's their choice. That's not a requirement of the commission. So you may come across it in property management, absolutely. So this is only for sales transactions. Understand residential and commercial sales are sales transactions. And we have a duty, and this is the tough part about this form. We have a duty to do this before or no later than first substantial contact. It's really easy when we think or can predict first substantial contact is going to happen. If you are preparing for a listing appointment, for example, or you are preparing for a buyer consultation, one of the first things we're going to do in our listing appointment, our buyer consultation, is working with real estate agent disclosure, right? Because we feel at some point during that buyer consultation, first substantial contact is going to hit. So as soon as we sit down, may I get you guys some water? Thanks for coming to the office. Let's sit down and have a chat. One of the first things I'm going to do is our working with real estate agent disclosure. However, what if we can't predict when it's going to happen? What if first substantial contact kind of slaps us upside the face, across the face? These things are so situational. And this is what I know. If you're doing an open house, be on alert for first substantial contact. Does that mean every single buyer that comes into your open house is going to hit first substantial contact? I mean, are we going to bombard them when they walk in the front door and say, you need to sign this disclosure? You want to get a buyer to turn around and run away really fast at an open house? That's what you do, bombard them with a form. Now, what if the buyer just comes in and chit chat, ooh, with the lovely weather we're having today? When we talk about first substantial contact, this word substantial means a whole lot. And as soon as we start asking for or receiving substantial information about the party as it relates to this transaction, maybe we talk about the weather. Maybe you told me what you had for lunch today. Maybe you tell me you're thinking about buying a house one day. We've not hit anything substantial. When the conversation, as a general rule of thumb, when the conversation switches gears from the property to the people, that's when we need to be on high alert. We can talk about the property all day long. You come to my open house and we can talk about the number of bedrooms and the carpet and the updated kitchen. We can talk about the property all day long. But once that buyer says anything about their price, term, or motive, PTM, price, term, or motive, we have hit first substantial contact. In a perfect world, we can do our disclosure before we get that first substantial contact. Do we live in a perfect world? No. And that's why we need to be on alert. Guys, we know people. People talk. Have you ever had a total stranger come up to you in the grocery store and just sharing their life story? And you're going, who the heck is this person? That's people. And what we need to be on alert on is the people that comes charging in the front door of the open house going, I need to buy a house in the next 2 months. Whoa. What about when you're out in the field? What about when you're, out and about running around town, running errands and you're wearing your name badge? If you have your name badge on, could people come up to you and start talking about real estate and cross that line into first substantial contact? Sure. We need to be on alert. And more importantly, we need to be prepared to stop the people from talking until we can disclose our agency status. This is the tricky part. We've got to be on alert. I don't know about you guys, but the house that I was raised in was told it's rude to interrupt people when they are talking. Anybody else raised in a similar home? It's rude to interrupt people when they're talking. Guess what, you guys? In this case, it's rude to let them keep talking. The best thing we can do to protect the consumer is to interrupt them. I have a feeling where this is going. Before you continue, before you say any more, I need you to stop talking and listen to this working with real estate agent disclosure. Guys, we're all licensed, we're all brokers, but you know what? Before we were brokers, we were consumers. We are all consumers. And if you're in a sales, as a consumer in a sales situation, you want to be treated fairly, don't you? You want the level playing field. And that's what we're trying to do with the consumers by doing our working with real estate agent disclosure. So to further break down this idea of first substantial contact, I'm going to go off book for just a second. I'm in the syllabus now. First substantial contact is going to be that point in time when either the broker begins to ask questions of the consumer, or the consumer begins to volunteer information about themselves as it relates to this transaction. So broker, consumer begin to act as if they already have an agency relationship. First substantial contact could also be that point in time when the consumer discloses their needs, wants, and desires about the property. Their PTM, that's the easiest way I have to remember it. Price, term, and motive. When the consumer starts talking about their acceptable asking price or listing price, when they talk about the terms of their desired contracts, or their motive for buying or selling, that typically is when we hit that first substantial contact. We're learning about their needs, desires, or wants about the property. Or first substantial contact could be that point in time when the when the consumer discloses any confidential information that can be used against them. And again, that PTM, price, term, and motive. First substantial contact, before I start asking and before they start volunteering information. Keep in mind, not everybody you meet is going to hit first substantial contact. Not everybody, not all consumers are going to turn into clients and customers. If they come and go out of your open house, you may never see them again. That doesn't negate my responsibility to do my job, to do my agency disclosure. I told you guys earlier, my firm uses .loop to store all of our transaction files. And I have a folder created for myself in .loop called WWREA 2023. So every single working with real estate agent disclosure I get signed this year is going in that folder. If that consumer ever becomes a client, they get their own loop, they get their own folder, and we can move that working with real estate agent disclosure to that with our working transaction folder. The point is we need to retain all of our working with real estate agent disclosures, even if we never see that consumer again. So when it comes to our agency disclosure, we need to provide the disclosure, our first substantial contact. We need to discuss our agency relationship options with them. Tell the consumer, this is the type of agency that my firm offers. We'll look at the form in just a second. And then the real estate commission says at that point in time, we need to determine in what capacity we're going to proceed. Maybe they're ready to sit down and sign an agency agreement today. Maybe they're not. But we need to have an idea on how to proceed. I need to know at this point, where will I put you in my plane? If I get to put you in my plane, where will you go? Will you go first class or will you get coach? Because I need to know now, do I owe you old car or do I only owe you honesty, fairness, and disclosure material facts? So once we do our disclosure, at that point in time, we got to determine our capacity, how we're going to proceed. With our disclosure, when we provide, it may depend. If first substantial contact happens in person, face to face, it's so easy to whip these things out, one of these things out of your bag at the open house and say, let's go over this together. So if we're in person, if we're face to face, again, getting ready for your buyer consultation, you're going to have one with you ready to go. So we're going to provide the disclosure immediately. We're going to review it and provide it with them. If first substantial contact doesn't happen face to face, maybe they call you, maybe they do an inquiry on your website, they send you an email. We still have a duty to stop and explain working with real estate agency with them, working with real estate agent disclosure with them. But now I'm not face to face, so I can't put it in their hand. So commission rule says we still review it with them, but now I have 3 days to send it to them. I have 3 days to deliver it to them. Can I make anybody do anything? Still figuring it out. I'd love some tips and tricks. I want to make everybody do everything, but I can't. Can I make anybody sign the working with real estate agent disclosure? No. You may have people look at you and say, I'm not signing this, or not reply when you send it electronically, when you send it in an email. Guys, I can't make anybody do anything. I mean, what are you going to do? Force the pen in their hand and say, and hold their hand and make them sign? No. If they refuse to sign it, all we can do is write, refuse to sign. And I would include as much information as you can. Do you know their name? Do you know the property they were inquiring about? What's the date? What's the time? I would put down as much information as you know, and of course, indicating that they refuse to sign. The commission expects to see some refuse to sign. If they investigate you and they look at your folder and all of your working with real estate agent disclosures say refuse to sign, is the commission going to have a little red flag go up? Probably. So don't think that's going to be your out. Well, I'm just going to refuse to sign all of them. I'm not going to do my disclosure. Yeah, no, that's not going to work for you. Again, maybe they refuse to sign it. We're not trying to create agency. If they say, no, I'm not signing that, we can still proceed. We can still do what we were going to do. It's not like I'm going to say, well, if you're not going to sign that, then we're done here. We have nothing else to talk about. Understand, this does not create agency. This is in no way of a contract. If we can deliver it in a way so they understand that it's in their best interest, the commission's trying to protect them. Specifically, when you're working with the sellers, we can plan or prepare on for substantial contact happening. If not by the listing appointment, then definitely at the listing appointment. We're going to talk more about listing appointments in just a bit. And the other thing that the seller needs to understand is, again, I don't owe you confidentiality until and if you decide to hire me. Competitive listing appointments are a very real thing, which means sellers are talking to multiple agents. You may be going on your listing appointment today to try to win the business, but they're going to talk to 3 other agents. So they don't know until later in the week whether or not they're going to hire you or not. Don't they have a right to know that whatever they tell you at this listing appointment, you don't owe them confidentiality? What if they have the nerve to hire one of the other agents they were talking to? They hired somebody else. Do you owe them confidentiality? No. What if you take the buyer to that transaction? Your loyalties to the buyer, everything the seller told you at that listing appointment, we have a duty to share with the buyer. So make sure this seller understands, if you don't hire me, I don't owe you that confidentiality. Whether or not you know you're in a competitive listing appointment or not. Sometimes you know you're competing and sometimes you don't. So we need to almost treat each one as if it is, because what if they hire somebody else? Working with our buyers, again, before we ask a lot of questions or before they start volunteering information. We know in this buyer consultation, we're going to start asking a lot of questions. We're going to hit first substantial contact. So let's just go ahead and get it out of the way. But what if they call you on a particular transaction? What if they wanted to see one of your listings, something you have listed? We still need to be prepared. We always need to be on alert for this first substantial contact. There's a couple minor differences. Most of what we're talking about with our agency disclosures is first substantial contact. The seller's agent, when we're talking to prospective buyers, understand in this first scenario, you've already been hired as a seller's agent. You're talking to a prospective buyer. This takes us back to our open house. As a listing agent, you may have 5 buyers in your open house this afternoon. Not any of them may hit first substantial contact. Again, we don't need to bombard them when they come in the front door, just when and if we need to be on alert. There's a difference. If you've already been hired as a buyer's agent and we are reaching out to the seller or the seller's agent, we've got to disclose our status of being a buyer's agent at initial contact. So let's talk about the difference between first substantial and initial. First substantial is when you learn something about the price, term, and motives. First substantial is when that conversation switches gears from the property to the people. Initial contact. Hi, my name is Julie, and I'm working with a buyer. I have a buyer. I'm representing a buyer. I am a buyer's agent. As a buyer's agent, you may reach out to the seller or the seller's agent a couple of different ways. Your buyer calls you and says, I want to see a property this afternoon at 5 o'clock when you get out of class. Let's meet at 5:15. And you say, great. And they say, so you go on break. Please don't do it now. That's a distraction, right? So you go on break and you schedule the showing for this evening when we get done with class. And you go into your showing service. I feel like most of us use showing time as our showing service. and you go into the showing service, schedule a showing. It's going to ask you your role. How do you want to see this property? Do you want to see it as a buyer's agent? Do you want to see it as a seller's agent? It's going to ask, or seller sub-agent, excuse me, it's going to ask you your role. You submit the request for the showing, and the listing and the seller, there it is, the seller and the listing agent get an email that says, Julie Yates, buyer's agent, wants to see your property today at 5:15. When did we disclose to that seller and listing agent that we were a buyer's agent? The first time I came across their desk, they got an email from me, Julie Campbell, buyer's agent, What if your buyer says, I want to see your property today, 5:15 when you're done with class, but they have a quick question. Maybe they want to know if there's any pets that have ever lived in the home, or if anybody ever smoked there. So now you call the listing agent, because you got to get this question answered before you show it. So now you call the listing agent and you say, my name is Julie Campbell and I'm working with a buyer. We have to disclose that role, that status of being a buyer's agent at initial contact. They have to know that going into it. So disclosure and consent to dual agency, again, that comes up in our working with real estate agent disclosure. How the firm offers dual agency. Do they offer designated dual agency? We're going to see all that just next. But if dual agency is on the table, we try to need to have this conversation, especially if the one they're interested in is also listed or has a buyer by your firm, another agent in your firm. So if dual agency is a possibility, we need to talk about it sooner rather than later. And all of this can be handled for us in our working with real estate agent disclosure. So let's go out and look at this. So we are the online learning system, the section 2 material, working with sellers. We also have the buyer's version when we get to section 3, working with buyers. But for right now, because we're here talking about sellers, let's look at this thing. They're pretty much the same. It's just one geared toward buyer and one geared towards seller. By the way, they completely revamped the working with real estate agent disclosure in July of 2021. This new form is amazing. I don't know if you remember July 2021, but you might have been doing your thing, and across the entire state of North Carolina, you might have remembered hearing a subtle woohoo. What you were hearing was all 100,000 plus licensees across the state of North Carolina going, thank you for this new form. Much, much, much better. We're still very appreciative of it. So this form does a better job of explaining. It gives us a better tool to explain it to buyers and sellers. It just makes it easier for everybody, consumers and agents, to do their thing. So we're very grateful for this. It tells us this form is required for use in all sales transactions. That does include residential and commercial. Again, we have a seller and a buyer version. So the one we're looking at right now is the seller version. And then it starts with a big importance. First thing this says is this form is not a contract. I'm not trying to create agency. I'm not trying to enter into an agency relationship with you. I'm just disclosing my agency status. So signing this disclosure only means that you've received it. We may never see each other again. We don't owe each other anything. You're only saying, yeah, I received it. In a real estate sales transaction, it is important that you understand whether an agent represents you. Does that say this agent? Does that say me? Does that say you? That just says an agent. That could be any agent across this entire state. We're not specifically talking about me. Consumer, it's important that you understand whether anybody represents you or not. An agent represents you. Agents are required to review this form with you at first substantial contact They define that as before asking for, receiving, or confidential information, and give you a copy after you sign it. This form is for your own protection. This third bullet point sums it up nicely. Do not share any confidential information with an agent or assume that the agent is acting on your behalf until you have entered into a written agency agreement with the agent to represent you. Otherwise, the agent can share your confidential information with the others. That's what this form does, you guys. Stop talking. Please stop talking and understand that what you tell me, you might as well be talking directly to my client. So you come busting in my open house and talking about how much you love this house and you would do anything for it. And you've been admiring it since you were a young kid in this neighborhood, riding your bike up and down in front of the street. I've heard this stuff before. And you tell me how much you love this house and everything that you would do for it. Now I have a duty to take that back to my seller. And what did my seller just hear? Cha-ching, 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 all day long. Everybody with me? Is that important for buyers to understand? Sellers to understand? Talking to me is like talking directly to my client. If you don't want the seller to know, don't tell me. And that's the point that we're trying to get across. That's the point that we're trying to get through. Then we have a note to the agent, check all relationship types below that may apply to the seller. And I got to make this a little small so we can see it all on one page, because I do think this is important. Then we have a list of the various types of agencies. So can you guys still see that? Okay. Still see that? Okay. So we got seller's agency, dual agency, designated dual agency, and a buyer agent working with an unrepresented seller, also known as a for sale by owner. This is the place for the agent to check the boxes of the type of agency your firm provides. So if your firm, for example, doesn't offer designated dual agency, maybe they don't participate in dual agency, then we're not going to check those boxes. We're only going to check the boxes. Think of this as like a menu. We're providing the consumers an options. And when we get to the point to create agency, now we got to select which option, which menu item they want to choose. But what we're doing is providing them a menu. And again, if your firm doesn't allow you to work as a designated dual agent, then we're not going to check that box. We're not going to give them that option. So how you complete this section comes back to your firm. Then we have a note to seller for more information, referring to the Q&A brochure that we'll look at in a second. The seller signs, 2 places for seller signatures and dates. Agents don't have to sign it, but we do need to print our name. We need our license number and the firm name. Again, if this individual refuses to sign, we're going to put refuse to sign, and as much information as we can, because we're documenting everything, right? So let's make sure we have as much documented information that we have, just in case. There's also another one very similar for buyers. I mean, the important is the same. It's still important. The only thing that changes a little bit are the menu options. Now we're going to select whether or not the firm offers buyer agency, dual agency, designated dual agency, or will the firm allow us to work with an unrepresented buyer as a seller subagent? So if the buyer chooses to go unrepresented, if they stay with a customer, they have no paperwork to sign. There's nothing for them to sign, but we just want to make sure that we indicate that on our working with real estate agents. What do we think about the working with real estate agent disclosure? I know we're starting to get used to it, getting better. We like it, Camille. Is it? John's not sure back there.
I mean, it's still a little bit challenging sometimes, just to have the conversation, but this form is so much better than what it was before. It just makes sense all of a sudden. So I appreciate that part.
Yeah, me too. Me too. All of us. Like I said, you heard a sound somewhere in July 2021. That was us. That was out celebrating the new. This is intimidating. I mean, guys, buying and selling a house is intimidating, right? The whole process is intimidating. Some people give real estate agents the same reputation as the shady used car salesman. We may not always have the best reputation with the consumer, is what I'm saying. So they come to us with their guard up. They come to us with their guard up because they heard of somebody that had a bad experience with an agent somewhere. So now we're all bad, right? So they come to us in the open house, like reluctant to make eye contact with this kind of thing. Because of course we're going to pounce and make them buy a house that they can't afford, right? Because that's what we do apparently. It's a word on the street. If we do this right, if we're presenting this properly, we may not be able to knock their guard down, but at least we can create awareness. At least we can, we're being pretty daggum honest here, aren't we? And at least we're letting them know up front. So we're not creating those expectations that, yeah, you can call, you can tell me whatever you want to, whenever you want to. I have to keep that confidential. We've always got to be on the lookout for that first substantial contact. Thank you for sharing that, Camille. Anybody else have thoughts? John, you kind of seemed on the fence. I saw.
Yeah, I've had a couple buyers reluctant to sign it just because of it just uses a lot of words rather than just representing the relationship that we have. Obviously the brochure with the pictures helps to define a lot of that.
Agree. We're going to look at that brochure in a second. I love the pictures. That was the other thing we got in July 2021. So there were two woohoos, a new form, and they added pictures. So that was a good day. And I agree, John, because they're reluctant. I had met a lady once. She called on the sign on something I had listed for sale. And so I met her at the house and we were standing in the driveway. I don't know if we were going to hit for a substantial contact or not, but did she have a right to know as we're going through this house and she's oohing and on? Doesn't she have the right to know that whatever she tells me, I have a duty to share with my seller? So while we were still in the driveway, I mean, we're doing this on the hood of my car, right? And I'm explaining this. And once we go in, just be careful what you say because my loyalty is to the seller. I mean, what did that poor buyer hear? I don't know you confidentiality. I'm not loyal to you. Everything I do is for my seller, not you. That's what she just heard. Yes. And so I handed her a pen and I said, please sign here. And she said, and I quote, I just met you. I'm not signing anything you give me. Fair enough. Let's go look at the house. I did my part. I did my job. She refused to sign it. It's not like I'm going to say, well, if you don't sign, I'm not going to show you this house. So have a nice day. Is that what's best for my seller? No, the best for my seller is to show their home to potentially interested buyers. So even though she refused to sign it, John, you sounds like you've had some buyers. The rest of you, if you have it, you will. Oh, yes, you will. They're going to look at you and say, I'm not signing that. And that's fine. I can't make them. But also understand, I think a very common misconception, if you don't sign this, okay, we can keep going. It's not like I have to wrap it up, get in my car and drive away because the consumer doesn't refuse to sign this. We just do the refuse to sign and go about doing what you're doing. What if you do your job properly, you properly go over the disclosure, explain this no confidentiality thing, and they even sign it. You're so good, they even sign it. And as soon as they sign it, this potential buyer at your listing looks at you and says, So anyway, as I was saying, I got to buy something in the next few months because my wife is 8 months pregnant and we got to get her moved in before she has the baby because we don't want to. What the heck did I just tell you? What did I just say? What if? Do you think this happens? You better. Again, people talk. So even after we do what we're supposed to do, if they insist on sharing, y'all need to whip out your pen and your notebook and take notes because you've got to take that back to your seller. You've warned them, you cautioned them, you had them sign a dang piece of paper saying they understand it. but they still want to tell you about their price, term, or motive, I can't make anybody stop talking. I don't know what else to say to them after this point. Always remember, your duty, your loyalty is to the one that hires you. And so in our scenarios here, that may be the seller in that transaction, regardless of the seller. Anyway, something about disclosure. So as I was saying, I got to buy something within the next 6 weeks. Okay, what else you want to share with me? It's amazing. Actually, Tatiana, we all need to be right back. So it is break time. Thank you. So let's see. I got 2:45. Let's come back at 2:55. Is that time right this time? I'm going to try not to get confused. 2:55. Okay, John's in agreement with me. So we'll see you guys in 10. Welcome back. All right. As we're coming back, I do want to go through, somebody mentioned the brochure before we went to break. So I do want to go through that because again, it's such a helpful tool to help us be able to better explain this thing. I'll share with you guys, back in my administrative days, I did a lot of new agent training. So I got you guys like right when you got your license, you affiliated with the firm and you were so excited, but you didn't know what to do next. So that's when I came in and kind of helped position and steer you guys. And probably one of the number one questions, one of the number one concerns I heard from you new agents was, what do I say? Like when I'm looking at the consumer, what am I talking about? I got all this stuff from pre and post. How do I put this in words to the consumer? Sure. So one answer I always had for my newbies was to be familiar with the forms. Because if you're familiar with the forms, then it'll help put words in your mouth. So these tools and things that we provide, again, helps us do our job, but it also helps formulate what we're going to say. So if we look at that brochure, if we go back to the email we got from Lane that we looked at the beginning with the class information, one of the attachments that you guys have is the WWREA Q&A brochure. And this comes in two different forms, two different versions. What you're looking at is this big 1, 2, 3, like 5-fold brochure that, you know, you can fold it down and have it in a nice, neat little, or you can fold it out. There's also a flat PDF version that this thing that you're looking at costs money. The PDF version does not. So if you're kind of frugal like me, or if you do a lot electronically, I just sent you a request to start, Kimberly, see if you got that. Then you can always get the flat PDF. I will say, and somebody already commented about the pictures, the flat PDF doesn't have the pictures. So that's one huge benefit with the brochure is the pictures. Yeah, if it won't let you. Yep. So we're gonna, again, this is in the email that you guys got from Lane. And I'm not going to go through this, but it is, I do think, kind of hit some of the highlights here. So it starts with, you know, working with real estate agents, defining or explaining to the consumer what agency means, what is an agency agreement, is there a standard length of time? We know the answer to that is no. It's kind of up to the firm's policy. It may depend on the market as well. Is there a standard fee for real estate agents? Again, we know the answer to that is no, but the consumers may not know that there's no fixed fees, no fixed commissions. Then this brochure kind of breaks it down into different categories. So it has the category of Q&A of working with sellers. There she is. We can see her again. So Q&A working with sellers. Can you hear me, Kimberly? Okay. All right. So Q&A working with sellers, again, help us address this of working with sellers. I want to sell my property. What do I need to know about working with agents? What services might a listing agent provide? How is the firm compensated, etc. So it just kind of puts tools in our hands to help have these conversations, guide these conversations. Then it comes out with a Q&A for buyers. I want to buy real estate. What do I need to know? What are buyer's agents' duties? And then we go back up to the second page of the brochure. What services might a buyer agent provide? What is the risk if I do dual agency? We address dual agency with both buyers and sellers. Can I buy real estate without hiring an agent? Yep, no requirement to do that. It touches on the topic of termination of agency relationship with the consumer. And then the big piece. This was our second woohoo on July of 2021. They gave us daggone pictures. Pictures just make life easier, doesn't it? I've been saying that since I started teaching back in, I don't know when. So we were all happy to see pictures. So they give us pictures with a couple different scenarios. The buyer agency and seller agency. You got one broker working with the red firm. You got another broker working with the blue firm. It's clear that they're with two different firms, right? One broker's holding the hand of the buyer. Another broker's holding the hand of the seller. This is our co-broker transaction. When we have two firms, one working with the seller, one working with the buyer. Then we get into dual and designated. And note, now we're just down to one firm. Now we're just dealing with the red firm. So the red firm dual agency can look one of two ways. Dual agency can be one broker working with both buyer and seller. Or in dual agency, you may have one broker working with the buyer, a different broker working with the seller. Check it out. These brokers are holding hands. Not that that's sweet and all, but it's helping the consumer understand we're in the same firm and we're all in this together. We are connected by the firm. Remember, dual agency is about the firm, not the individual agent. If your firm allows you to go into designated dual agency, I still got red broker holding the buyer's hand. I got red broker holding the seller's hand, but now our brokers aren't holding hands anymore. Exclusivity comes back in designated. We're going to spend some more time on dual and designated near the end of this class. We've got a whole section dedicated to that, so we'll see that next weekend. But I do agree with you guys, and I hope you agree with us that the pictures just help. It gives us this visual. And John or Camille, I can't remember which one of you said, but this brochure allows us to better explain the working with real estate agent disclosure. I think the other thing that consumers, and you guys may have come across this, in general, across the state of North Carolina, we as real estate agents are not good about doing our disclosure. And some agents even don't do it. It's not a problem until it's a problem. And now it's a problem. So those that don't do it, one day it could become a problem. I certainly don't want to encourage the practice of, well, nobody else does it, I'm not going to either. I'm telling you guys, agents across the state aren't the best at doing this. And I think we've kind of hit on why. It's bumpy, it's awkward. You got a buyer coming to you with their guard up and they're just waiting on you to pounce, because that's who we are. We're shady salesmen, aren't we? And our only objective is to get them to spend lots and lots of money. The more money they spend, the more commission I make. So they come in with trust issues. Have you guys ever not trusted somebody? It's hard for that wall to fall down, isn't it? It's hard for that guard to come down. So we've already talked about why this isn't the most pleasant of things that we do, but we've also talked about why we're required to do it. Working with real estate agent disclosure, yeah, my license says I have to, and I have to keep a record and da-da-da-da-da. But the reason that we're required to do it is because that's what's best for the consumer to understand better what they're getting. So don't let other agents convince you that you don't have to do this. License law and commission rule 58A.0104 addresses this. There's been so many stories. Again, it's not a problem until it's a problem. I kind of think of the commission sometimes as the IRS. If you give them a reason to investigate a file, they may say while we're here, hey, let's look at all your transaction files in the last 2 years. And if you don't have working with real estate agent disclosures for your transactions, or if you don't have, or if all of them say refuse to sign, guess what? Now you officially have a problem, because the commission's going to determine you're not doing your disclosure properly. I had a gentleman in post licensing. I did this class last time back in March or April, I think. And I had a gentleman, he said, so I got my license about 3 weeks ago. And I said, oh, congratulations. He said, yeah, don't get excited yet. He said, 3 weeks and I'm already on my second firm. I said, that's okay. The first one didn't work out. It's okay. It's okay. He had a whole laundry list of reasons why things didn't work out. And I'm not going to say that this was the straw that broke the camel's back, but it seems like this was the one that was up there. He was going through his new agent onboarding, like new agent training, and they were talking about working with buyers and sellers, and the firm never said anything about the disclosure. So this guy that was a really good pre-licensing student popped his hand up and said something about working with real estate agent disclosure. And you know what the firm said? We don't do that. You don't need to worry about that here. You know what he said shortly after that? Bye-bye. Again, I'm not saying it's what did it, but if that's their policy on that, what's their policy on other agency practices, on other license law and commission rule? We need to decide what's best for us. I have so many times you guys come out of pre and post and you come back afterwards. I had a guy reach out to me. It's probably been a couple months now. He was in my pre last year or something. And he was struggling a little bit. I heard from him a little bit, and he was starting to go, he's like, I can't get anybody to commit. I can't get anybody to sign. I said, you just got it. You got to find your way. You know, you got to find get your groove going and find that first one can be tough. The second one can be tough, but once you get going, you're good. So he called me back a little bit later and he said, Julie, guess what? He said he met a buyer first time. They were doing their buyer consultation. He presented working with real estate agent disclosure. He went over the Q&A brochure. That buyer said, I have talked to other agents and I've never seen this before. She said, you are the only one that seemed interested in protecting me. You are the only one that cared enough to do this. Where do I sign up with you? And he truly believes that he got that buyer as a client because he was the only one that did this. I've heard that story time and time and time again. The consumer pays attention, you guys. And when the consumer, if the seller's talking to several listing agents, do you think they're taking notes? If the seller's talking to several buyer's agents, are they taking notes? They're trying to find the one that's best. And bottom line, the one that's doing what's right, hopefully is going to be the one to win. So don't let others, don't let the standard or whatever. Commission rule 58A.0104 says we've got to do our agency disclosure. I'll share one more story with you on this. This one came out of the commission. This has been a while, 6 years, 8 years. I don't know, time gets away with me, but it's been a while. A commissioner, one of our commissioners was interested in buying a house. Honestly. And one Sunday, he and his wife went open housing. And they went into an open house and started having a conversation with the agent. And the commissioner felt like they reached that point in time where they hit for substantial contact. And the agent never stopped them. And they continued the conversation and continued and continued. And finally, he said, when he knew that they had hit for substantial contact, he looked at that agent and he said, is there anything you need to discuss with me? And the agent said, nope. He was like, nothing you need to disclose? He was like, nothing about agency that we need to review. Agent said, nope, I'll ship shape. He gave her three opportunities to do the working with real estate agent disclosure, and what she didn't. And at that point, what do you think he said? I'm one of your commissioners. I'm one of the ones that gets to regulate your license. And she probably said, well, I'm not going to say what she probably said because I'm being recorded. We know what she probably said. There were some bad words coming out. Seriously, you guys, there's a reason for this form. There's a reason why we do this. And this is not, like I said, this is not what we like to do. This is not our preferred. It takes time to come out smooth. And that's what you got to do is get through that. So you'll get through your awkward stage, right? It's like going through adolescence again. You'll get through your awkward stage and we'll come out of these as good, strong agents. Questions, comments? Again, this was in the email you guys got from Lane. I do think you guys should look over it. It's down here in one of the attachments that you got from her. I do think you should look over this because it explains agency. It's not just for you guys to, understand it for your test. It explains agency and walks everybody through that process. One more piece of section 1, we're going off book completely. So don't even pay attention to your books for a bit. There's one little last section in this section 1 material. And it's straight from the syllabus. And specifically that topic is racial equity. The Real Estate Commission has recently taken a big stance towards racial equity, making sure that all consumers and real estate transactions are treated fairly and equally, regardless of their racial or ethnic background makeup. In addition to protecting agents as well, making sure that we're all treated fairly and equally, independent on our racial background or any kind of ethnic background. So the first point in understanding racial equity is defining racial equity. And there's several different sources where these definitions can come from. So if we look at some examples of sources, one source defines racial equity as a society in which people are no more or less likely to experience society's benefits or burdens because of the color of their skin. Kimberly, City of Durham, has weighed in on racial equity. They say the condition when racial identity cannot be used to predict individual or group outcomes, and outcomes for all groups are improved. Merriam-Webster's definition has weighed in. They say racial equity is freedom from bias or favoritism. And then the last source we have is the Center of Assessment and Policy Development. It says the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicated how one fares. So again, the commission's commitment to the fight for racial equity is not just dealing with home ownership, landlords, tenants, buyers, but also checking with us soon, checking in with us as well. There's a new page on the commission's website for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion division of the Real Estate Commission. So we'll see that in just a second. It's fairly new, within like the last year or so. They also now have a DEI officer. So they have somebody that's dedicated just to diversity, equity, and individualism department down at the commission. So we'll see that website in just a second, but there's plethora of opportunity, educational opportunities, not just for the consumers, but for us as well. So the Real Estate Commission's commitment to racial equity, again, about education and creating awareness. And the other thing that this commitment has allowed the commission to do is to revisit some of their existing commission rules. So 58A.1601 has always been around. This is nothing new. And this has always supported the racial equity. So fair housing rule says conduct by a licensee which violates the provision of state fair housing could serve not only as a violation of this general statute, but is also a violation of 58A. We also know federal fair housing. We are going to touch on fair housing in this class in just a bit, not today, but tomorrow. Another existing rule that supported racial equity is 58A.0104B. 0104 is in our agency agreements. There's always been a provision that requires our written agency agreements have the non-discriminatory clause. So we'll remember when we look at our agency agreements, we have a non-discrimination clause in our agency agreements. And as a matter of fact, any agency agreement we're using is required to have the non-discrimination clause. And then also towards this fight for racial equity, the commission has created a new rule. This came out in July of 21. 58A.0120, specifically D, says a broker shall not conduct brokerage activities or otherwise promote their status as a real estate broker in any manner that discriminates on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, or disabilities. And I hope you recognize those as our protected classes. The new rule sounds very similar. I'm going to go back for 1 second. The new rule sounds very similar to 58A.0104. The difference is 58A.0104 only addresses agency relationships, meaning we're only required to abide by this when we enter into agency. 58A.0120 says we need to fight for racial equity whether we have an agency relationship or not. All of my conduct, may that be activities toward getting buyers or sellers in an agency agreement, my advertisement, my promotion, in no way as a licensed broker can I have violations against 58A.0120, specifically D. The commission also addresses, as they always have, our advertising, making sure that your ads are in no way discriminatory. Fair Housing, well, HUD is part of Fair Housing, has had their advertising guidelines. You can Google Part 109 Fair Housing Advertising, and what you're going to get is a whole bunch of words that Fair Housing has said, proceed with caution. Because it might be that those words, if misconstrued or misinterpreted, could be misunderstood as a discriminatory advertising. So we need to be really, really, really careful in our advertising. BICs, one thing that BICs are responsible of for their office, whether you're a provisional broker or a full broker, BICs are responsible for all the advertisement that comes out of the firm, all of the advertising that comes out of the firm. Especially as provisional brokers, it's suggested that BICs is reviewing your ads, trying to get you guys understanding early in your career what is and is not allowed. Maybe your BIC is reviewing, maybe it's not, but understand, if any discriminatory advertising does come out of the firm, the BIC will be on the hook, probably in addition to the agent. As we said earlier, when you're putting a listing in MLS, have somebody else look at it. Have somebody else read those descriptions and those remarks to make sure there's not anything inadvertent. Triad MLS, not this year, maybe not even last year, maybe it was sometime in 2021. Triad MLS, from this Part 109 Fair Housing Advertising, implemented a new software in our MLS. And that software is identifying those words that may be construed as discriminatory. So when you're typing your remarks in, they may flag a word. Now, they're not telling me I can't use it, but they're just saying, careful, make sure that this word is being used in the proper terms, in the proper sense. For example, I told you guys I do listings for my firm, and we do a lot with builders. We have a lot with builders. And I was putting a listing in one day for the builder, and I was typing out the remarks, and the remarks were talking about the white kitchen cabinets. And MLS flagged the word white. If the word white was used inappropriately, could that be seen as a discriminatory advertisement? Now, MLS, their software can't identify that I was using it to describe cabinets. All they could identify was that potentially discriminating word. They didn't tell me I couldn't use it. They didn't tell me I couldn't submit it. They just offered me a warning. Warning, make sure this word is being used appropriately. I don't know if Canopy has anything like, I'm sure they do by now. If Canopy has anything like that, do you know? Not sure. I would think so. Something. If not, maybe coming soon to Canopy. But again, it's been a helpful program, and it's really eye-opening too. I'll say the other thing that Triad MLS has done in the last couple of years, they've changed up some of their verbiage for their listings. So for example, in Triad MLS, you're no longer going to see master bedroom, master bathroom. they've changed that verbiage to primary bedroom, primary bathroom. So even just the words themselves, we're starting to revisit and making sure that it in no way unintentionally affects others. Another term with racial equity to understand is implicit bias. Implicit bias is a prejudice that's present, but it's not consciously held or recognized. Some kind of unconscious attitude or stereotype. Maybe it comes from historical interpretations. Maybe it's your own personal experience. Maybe it's your upbringing, something that came up as a child that stuck with you throughout these years. You hold this implicit bias, but you're not conscious of it. You're not aware of it. One point that the commission is working hard to help educate all of us is that it stands to reason we all have some implicit bias within us. And so to helping us identify that implicit bias so we can acknowledge it and address it and allow us to move forward without this implicit bias. So we can help educate ourselves, the history of homeownership across the country over the years, the education materials available that we're getting ready to talk to you guys about. We can be knowledgeable, educating ourselves about fair housing and how we can be in compliance with fair housing. And then implicit bias, the commission also encourages companies and firms to revisit their policies, revisit their procedures, and make sure that we don't have any, again, inadvertent, outdated, maybe, or inadvertent verbiage or anything that may be sensitive or seem discriminatory. So constantly revisiting awareness, training, education. The National Association of Realtors weighs in as well, NAR. NAR has always had a strict code of ethics. Part of that code of ethics, if you guys are affiliated with a firm and you've joined your local MLS, one thing you did was gone over NAR's code of ethics. There's always been this code about policies that address racial injustice. Agents always have a duty to follow fair housing through NAR. By the way, NAR has coined April as Fair Housing Month. So April is a great time to tune into NAR. They always release a lot of good material, a lot of updated material as things change. NAR is staying constant on that. You may want to mention it to your firms because you can get some good training material out of NAR too, especially in the month of April. So April is a very, very good month. NAR also has, they just got this in 2020. I remember it was the pandemic. But they have a simulation for those of you that are members of NAR already. They have a simulation that's called Fair Haven simulation. Do you guys remember those books when you were kids, the Choose Your Own Adventures? Fair Haven simulation is kind of like a choose your own adventure. Fair Haven is a fictitious town and you are the agent of Fair Haven. And they walk you through different scenarios of working with the people of Fair Haven. And based on your response to those people, NAR will help educate and bring insight to you and your responses. So for those of you that are active with your firms, you've probably joined NAR, you have access, you have something now called a NERDS number. I don't even have my NERDS number memorized, so you don't even learn that memorized. That thing's like a 9-digit number, right? So we don't need that. But once you get at NAR, you may want to consider doing the Fair Haven simulation as part of your efforts, ongoing efforts for racial equity. Another program that falls under the category is the Housing Choice Voucher Program. You guys have probably heard this more referred to Section 8 housing. Section 8 housing is housing designed for lower income homes. Those lower income homes have to qualify, they have to approve, they have to send their application and get approval from the local public housing department. Landlords can choose to allow their home to be open for Section 8 housing tenants. There's no requirement to comply with this program. But landlords that do choose to participate have certain criteria that the property must follow. So for example, Section 8 housing demands that these low-income families have decent housing that's safe and clean. And that's the landlord's responsibility to make sure that they provide that. I think a common misconception with Section 8 housing is that landlords aren't going to get paid rent, or landlords aren't going to get paid as much rent as what they think that they should. And that's not what Section 8 housing is about. Not only are they going to protect the tenants, but they're also going to protect the landlord in the event the tenant can't pay. Yes, there are criteria, there are standards that the landlord has to keep the home in, but they don't have to worry sometimes as much about vacancy and collecting rent. Pluses and minuses to anything. So if you're a landlord, you may want to consider looking into the Housing Choice Voucher program. The other term for us to understand with racial equity is disparate impact. This occurs when there's some kind of policy that on its face seems neutral, but its effect can disproportionately harm a member of the protected class. It wasn't its intent. It's not why it was designed. It's not what it was drawn up to do. However, the consequences could result to a member of a protected class feeling that they were disproportionately harmed. So again, back to companies and firms constantly revisiting, reviewing their rules, the firm's policies, how they operate. Sometimes things help to have a fresh set of eyes on them. I mean, sometimes we see things 20 times and we don't see it anymore. So having a fresh set of eyes on things can definitely help clean that up and make sure there's no unintentional practices. Some sources, just some examples of where else we might see disparate impact. The landlord, for example, can deny housing based on no income. The landlord can request to view your income history. What they can't discriminate against is the source of the income, assuming that your income is coming from a legal source. So the landlord can request to see your income, make sure that you can afford to pay rent, but they cannot discriminate. They should not ask the source of the income, because that could be a disparate impact. That act itself could have unproportioned consequences. People with disabilities, various rules and acts, policies could affect those with disabilities, family with children, and then discriminate against those based on their race or national origin, their ethnic, their background, their makeup. So again, it's about awareness, it's creating knowledge, educating the consumers, me and you. So with these equity issues, the question is, what can we do as a broker? Well, we talked about, we're going to look at the Commission's new page, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion webpage. Like I said, they do have a new DEI officer down at the Commission that's working hard to create this page and build to it. What else can we do as brokers? We can educate ourselves. We've already talked about some sources. We're familiar with fair housing. We can check out the Commission's website in a second. NAR. There's so much training out there. I know the North Carolina Association of Realtors has offered training, so it's about educating ourselves. But bottom line, you guys, what can we do as a broker? Again, I can't make anybody do anything. So as a broker, you very well may come across a situation with a seller or a buyer that tells you they want to discriminate. You know, the seller may look at you and say, I don't want to sell my house to anybody that fill in the blank. And that's when we have to stop and have a conversation with the seller. Heck, I have a Q&A brochure on fair housing that I can provide them and put it in their hand. that explains when an offer comes in, we're not going to rely on the race, color, sex of the buyer that was making the offer. When that offer comes in, all we're going to care about is, can they afford it? Can they buy the house? If that seller insists, if that seller demands that they are not going to work with that member of the protected class because of their protected class, guys, bottom line, we may just need to walk away. If we can't get the seller to comply, if we can't get the seller to hear us and understand and read the literature, again, we follow their lawful instructions. So nobody, buyer, seller, client, landlord, tenant, can make me discriminate. And if they insist, I don't know, I don't really want to work with that person anyway. I don't know about you guys. But if they insist, our absolute best bet might just be to walk away. Because we too not only could face, of course, the disciplinary action from the commission, but we could also be looking at actions from HUD with federal fair housing violations, North Carolina state fair housing violations. There could be a long list of things. So we've got to protect ourselves and our license. And we don't need to work with those people. We're not going to get far anyway. It blows my mind when I look back at my sales transactions over the years, how many times I've had sellers and buyers tell me after we're under contract, oh yeah, I looked the buyer up on Google. I Googled the seller. Why? Well, I want to know where they live and where they worked and what they did. And why? I think the only thing that we should care about in real estate transaction is, can you sell and can I buy? I mean, otherwise, what do the people have to do with it? So again, we try to educate the consumers. I've tried to get to the bottom, and I think sometimes we're just nosy neighbors. Again, I hear about this after we're under contract, but had this come up when we're negotiating the offer, well, I'm not going to sell to these people because I think based on their name, they look like this. Really? I think sellers should only see one color, and the color they should be seeing is green. That's it. How much are you willing to pay me for my house? And can you afford to do it? Can you get the loan or can you get the financing? So let's go back out real quick. Commission's website, again, ncrec.gov, plethora of information in here. And still on the home page, if we scroll down, they used to have the statement on the page, but they've recently given them their own page. So here's our commission's diversity, equity, and inclusion statement that goes over the commission's dedication to the new DEI division. And then, as we said, we have our new DEI website. So they're working, I mean, this has built up a lot since the last time I've been here. What is DEI? How can you help foster DEI in real estate brokerage? This is the commission's commitment to social justice, their statement to the public, disclosing their statement, the objective and goals. And then you can see we have some additional resources, some links directly to fair housing, some stats if you're a numbers person, various books and articles, places you can get other information, upcoming events, and then the contact us. So I recommend keeping your eye on this page because as it grows, it's going to continue to add good information to help us educate the public. It's a big part of our job is educating the public. And that is the same when we're dealing with fair housing and racial equity issues. What comments do I have about this?
No questions, I guess.
By the way, the new DEI officer named Tiffany Ross. Once upon a time ago, she was a fellow pre and post licensing instructor. We all got to start somewhere. It's exciting when you see a name for a good reason come across the commission's website that you know, you'll, I know her. Okay. We're going to touch on fair housing again, just a little bit as we keep going. I think we'll work with sellers. We won't see this today, but we'll get there tomorrow. First section done. One section down, how many more to go? Woo, we're getting there, right? One section at a time. So section 1, again, hopefully most of section 1 was just a really good review. Old car, material facts, various things of importance. Section 2, this is our longest section. We're going to be here today. We will be here all day tomorrow. And we'll probably have some more of this to wrap up next Saturday when we meet. So section 2, working with sellers, is our most in-depth section. As I mentioned earlier, and again, I like just to remind you guys, because I know this can get overwhelming with a lot of information coming at you. For this post-licensing class, your focus is on chapters 8 and 9. We're going to see some information that comes throughout other places of your book. So we'll certainly reference, I'm not guaranteeing all my page numbers are right, but we'll certainly reference those when we get to make sure you guys can get that information. But if you want to know your main areas of study, your main areas of focus from your manual is just chapters 8 and 9. That's not too bad, just 2 chapters, right? We could have you say, read the whole book, read the whole manual. No, just 2. Is that fair? For now. You'll read others when you get, I don't think you touched the book much in 303. So if that makes you feel, just a few chapters in 302. All right, so we are switching gears, and section 2 is all about working with sellers, sales transactions. May that be residential sales or commercial sales. Guys, understand, the point of post-licensing is to help educate you in dealing with clients and customers. I'm not here to teach you how to be successful in real estate. We're going to tell you some things that you can't do to solicit business, but as far as how you conduct your business, how you get that business, what kind of agent you're going to, that's not why I'm here. I'm here to help give you the information you need so you can form your own buyer and sellers. The other piece of this before we go in, there is no exact order to working with sellers. There's so many different scenarios. Maybe the seller calls you, you know the seller personally. Let's say it's a family member. That family member calls you and says, hey, we want to sell. Can you come over next week and get it on the market? Of course, your answer is going to be like, yeah. You may get a call later from another seller that says, we're thinking about selling. Can we meet with you to discuss the possibilities? So you may not go getting an agency agreement signed. I guess my point is there is no one way of doing it. So this conversation, as far as the order and the semantics, is going to be kind of broad, understanding there's several different ways to go about it. Bottom line, we just want you to get the listing. So hopefully that section, this is what that section will help with. When we're dealing with our agency contracts, general requirements, anytime we're working with a property owner, may that be for sale, may that be for rent. Anytime we're working with a property owner, we must have our agency agreement in writing and signed from the beginning of the relationship. I cannot do anything for an owner without having this thing signed and in writing. So step 1, working with real estate agent disclosure. Step 2, getting the sucker signed. When we talk about buyers, we're going to see that's a little bit different, but our focus for right now is just on sellers. By the way, we're in unit 9 or chapter 9, if you're following along. So let's talk about these written agency agreements. All of our written agency agreements, buyer, seller, property management, tenant, whatever, all of our agency agreements have musts. One must of our agency agreements, they must be signed by all the parties. Now, our agency agreements are between the client and the firm. The firm probably isn't signing the agency agreement. The firm is allowing the agent to sign the agency agreement on their behalf. The firm is an entity. They need a physical person to sign the agency agreement. So it's signed by all parties, client and agent on the firm's behalf. Because the agent is the one signing it, we need to include our license number. Looks like you guys mostly have those things memorized. If not, go ahead and memorize them, because everywhere you go, you need that license number. All your paperwork, anything you put your name on, you need that license number. Our agency agreements must have a definite termination date. I mentioned earlier, agency agreements actually say this agency agreement is good until 11:59 p.m. on this date. And then our agency agreements must have our non-discrimination clause. Let the consumer know that the firm nor the broker will engage in discriminatory practices. So the musts that we see in any of our written agency agreements, again, working with an owner, seller, or landlord, those agency agreements are in writing up front. Skipping around ahead just a little bit, we're going to fast forward page 216. In chapter 9, we're going to talk about limited service listing contracts. Most firms are a full service brokerage firm. However, gaining in popularity, something that we're starting to see more and more, are limited service firms. With limited service firms, we're only limiting the services. We're not limiting the duties. So in other words, limited service firms still owe their clients old car. What we're limiting is the service. I tend to think of like a la carte pricing. It's like ordering off the dollar menu at Wendy's. It's a la carte. You go in and you say, I want this, this, and this. And what you're charged is going to be based off of the products that you order. So the fee is fixed or flat. You can pay X amount to put your listing in MLS, X amount to have a combo box on the property. Do you want an open house on Sunday? You're going to pay X amount. It's a la carte pricing. It's a la carte services. The Real Estate Commission, or not the Real Estate Commission, I'm sorry, the North Carolina Association of Realtors does not provide pre-printed agency agreements for limited service firms, which means the limited service firm probably has an attorney draft something up that allows their agents to use to create these types of relationships. Please understand, all we are limiting is the service. Limited service firms cannot waive their duties to discover and disclose material facts. We always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. This doesn't give us an opportunity or an out to avoid making false promises. Can't waive your duties to avoid any undisclosed conflict of interest. Limited service firms still have to account if they have a trust account or an escrow account. Any funds coming through on the client's behalf, they're still responsible. Limited services firms have to act competently. Just because you're limiting your services doesn't mean you can not practice reasonable skill, care, and diligence. Always have a duty, I'll get you 1 second. Always have a duty to promptly deliver offers and contracts. License, law, and commission rule says we deliver all offers to our sellers. Still have to comply with the Residential Property Disclosure Act, which we'll talk about. Still have to comply with lead-based paint. Again, I owe you old car. It's just the services a la carte. Yes, ma'am, Tatiana, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I was just gonna say, isn't a good example of this? I've seen some of the listing on MLS, and then it says like in the remarks, only contracted or hired, for them to post the listing, and then other like inquiries or like showings, you have to contact the seller directly.
That's
Okay.
exactly it. That's exactly it. Showing instructions, offer submission. That's probably all going to be spelled out in MLS. And Tatiana, what I've seen with these are contact the seller directly. Obviously, that's not a service that they pay for. And I have no doubt that the agent's not in the background with the seller, helping the seller negotiate the offer and da 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 da. I did one of these many years ago. I was the buyer's agent, and I was doing an open house one Sunday, and my buyer had a couple homes she wanted to see. So I sent her open housing. And when I send my buyers open housing, I don't know why this is important, but things to think about. I always send my buyers open housing with a stack of my business cards. Because as a buyer, when you walk in the front door, what's one of the first questions you're asked? Do you have an agent? And I wanted my guys not only to say yes, but also to say, as a matter of fact, here's her card. Because who do I want that agent calling? I don't want them calling my buyer. I want them calling me. So I digress. I sent her open housing. She called me that afternoon with open house and said, I found it. I'm ready to write an offer. I thought, well, dang, that was easy. So I looked the listing up in MLS. Sure enough, it was a limited service listing. I was hesitant going into it because, like Tatiana said, all the instructors said, contact the seller directly, submit the offer to the seller. And I believe it actually said, don't contact the listing firm. All communication was through the seller. And I was a little hesitant. I'm not going to lie. To this day, I have yet to have any communication with that listing agent. We never emailed, texted, talked on the phone, nothing. Literally everything I did with the seller. And guys, I'm going to tell you, this seller was an investor. They did this 10 or 12 times a year. He didn't need full service representation. That seller needed an agent to get his listing into MLS so he could sell it. My buyer told me later that the seller was the one doing the open house. She told me at closing, she's like, that's who I met at the open house. And I was like, wow, that was the seller. That wasn't even the agent. It turned out to be one of the smoothest transactions I've ever done. And I think the fact that the seller was an investor and they've been through this a few times absolutely was helpful. I recognize that. But I just say all that to say, don't go into these with hesitations. Some agents are forming a bad habit and are starting to call these types of firms discount brokers. Does that have a negative connotation to it? Yeah, they're not discount brokers as far as the duties go. And to the consumer, that's what they need to care about. What duties do you owe me? So we're not going to dismiss these. We're not going to, say anything bad about them. That could be a violation of our Sherman Antitrust Act. And again, we always follow the instructions in MLS, right? So if it says contact the seller directly, submit offers to the seller, we're going to do what we're told. By the way, when that closing happened, we looked at the closing disclosure, and I had the full amount of commission that my firm expects to collect when we work with a buyer. And the commission to the listing firm was like $450. So whatever their a la carte pricing was, they only got $450 worth of services. I know they paid to put it in MLS. In that case, I'm not sure if they paid to do much else. But even though I never talked to the agent, I hope they were in the background with the seller, helping them through the negotiations, answering any questions, that kind of thing. What thoughts do we have about these? I think it's great. If you've never sold a house before, if you're a first-time home buyer, now that makes you a first-time seller. I don't know that this is the best because there's a lot involved in selling a house. There's a lot involved in selling a house. But again, if you're that investor that does that 10, 12 times a year, this is a good option. It just depends on who that seller is. I came across another one of these. I had buyers that called me. They said, we're interested in 123 Main Street. Of course, I went to MLS to see how much commission they were going to pay me when I sold them this house. Y'all know what the MLS said? a half, 0.5%. So I'm a little naive. I know this about myself. I have some naivety to me. So what did I do? I called the listing agent. I think I found a mistake in your MLS. She said, nope, no mistake. I was like, huh, 0.5% to bring you a ready, willing, and able buyer. All right, no fear. I had a written buyer agency agreement in place that says, this is what we think you should get when you sell us a house. And if the seller won't pay it, we'll pay the difference. So who was the next call I made? To my buyer. I said, if you proceed with this home, you're going to have to ante up some money. 0.5%. That doesn't really cover gas, does it? This is why we have these agency agreements in place to protect our commission.
The fact that they would put it out there like that.
Right. I mean, that's the agreement between the seller and the, how much will they get? And I have no idea, because as buyer's agents, we don't see those listing agreements, do we? But what I know is what they were willing to offer me, and that wasn't enough. So yeah, I called my buyers. They said, yeah, sure, that's fine, whatever. We went and looked at the property. They weren't far in the house at all before they said, no, this isn't the one for us. And silently to myself, I said, so we were able to move on. Another thing we have in place, again, particularly working with sellers. In North Carolina, we have something called a protection agreement. This is meant to protect us. And where we see this protection agreement is when we're working as a buyer's agent and that buyer's going after for sale by owner. So you're a buyer's agent, your buyer calls you and says, I found a FSBO, I want to see it this afternoon when you get out of class. You say, yay. You contact the for sale by owner. You say, I have buyers that want to come by at 5:15. They say, awesome, we look forward to meeting you. And then you ask the for sale by owner, if this buyer buys, if my buyer buys, are you willing to cooperate with me? Are you willing to compensate me? I think we've already agreed. Does the for sale by owner have to compensate you? Do they have to pay your commission? No, they've chosen to go unrepresented. Now, some FSBOs may advertise, some FSBOs may offer. It doesn't hurt us to ask. So let's say this FSBO does agree to pay your commission. Are you going to take them at their word? When they say on the phone, yeah, sure, I'll pay you, no problems, don't worry. What do we do when we hear those words? Don't worry. We tend to worry a little bit, don't we? So if that FSBO agrees to pay you, I need you guys to get that document, and we got a form we're going to look at in just a second. So if they agree to pay you, we got a form, again, to protect our agreement, our commission, that protection agreement. Whether or not the for sale by owner agrees to pay you, I don't care if they say yes or no. There is a form that we need to go over with that for sale by owner, regardless if they're going to pay you. Can anybody tell me what form that is? What do I need to have a discussion with the for sale by owner? I'm seeing some mouths move. I'm getting better at reading lips since I've been on Zoom for over 3 years now.
Can you repeat your question?
Whether or not the FSBO is going to pay you or not, there's a form I've got to go over with them.
So working with real estate agent.
That's it. That's it. Doesn't that for sale by owner have the right to know that I represent the buyer in this transaction? Doesn't that for sale by owner have the right to know that whatever you tell me is just like telling my buyer directly? Guys, I'm not trying to solicit their business. I'm trying to help my buyer buy this house. If the FSBO wanted to hire me, they would have already done it. I'm not here to get, now if they say, can't we just hire you? Can't you just be a dual agency? Well, yeah, run out to your car and get your listing agreement. We can do that right now too. But typically for sale by owners don't want to be represented, which is fine. We're going to respect that. But we always need to do our working with real estate agent disclosure So the for sale by owner knows where we stand and where our loyalty is. Remember, commission or loyalty, I should say, doesn't follow the money. So if the FSBO does pay you, my loyalty is still to my buyer. If the FSBO does agree to pay you, the form you're looking for is called Unrepresented Seller Disclosure and Fee Agreement, which is our NCAR standard form number 150. And this is what's going to protect our commission. It's not creating agency. It's not trying to create that relationship. We're securing payment from the unrepresented seller. You guys done FSBOs yet? Any of you that are active, have you worked with FSBOs yet? I feel like we don't have as many FSBOs out as what we did. I'm still seeing some, but it seems like that number has come down. John, what do you think about FSBOs? Uh-oh. John just froze
Not
on
those
us.
words. They were more harsh.
Again, I guess recognizing the fact that the FSBO chose to go this unrepresented. I mean, why did they choose to go unrepresented? There could be a cajillion reasons out there. Probably one of the more common reasons, they don't want to pay our commission. So they're going to sell it without us to not pay us. That's the route they chose to go. We always need to be careful we don't cross that fine line of like undisclosed dual agency, for example. Your interest in this as a buyer's agent is to get your buyer in the property, and you're only doing what you need to do with the FSBO to get your buyer through that transaction. Remember our plane? Buyers in first class, that FSBO's back in coach. So we're still going to help them get from point A to point B. Other questions? Goodness. All right, last break. So let's take 10, last big stretch, drink of water, whatever. We'll come back in 10 minutes and we'll wrap it up for the day. Welcome back. John, we're gonna be up in your neck of the woods in a few weeks. We're gonna do a long weekend to Brevard. I mean, it's one of my favorite places like ever, and every chance I get to go up there. I mean, it's God's country up there. So we'll be heading your way. I got a new car a couple weeks ago. I need to see how it does going up the mountain. I'm gonna hit that gas pedal and see what it's got. I may exceed the speed limit. I don't know, but the true test. All right. So we are back. We talked about our protection agreement. We talked about limited service. Again, skipping around in the book, which is why I'm trying really hard to get you page numbers. And I promise I will get those in for you guys so you can, but focus is on chapters 8 and 9. Skip ahead again on page 226. And we talk specifically or around, I'm not skipping stuff, we're just skipping around. Now we're talking specifically about MLS. Multiple listing services, MLS. Our voluntary association, it's an opportunity for us as brokers to come together to share our listings and invite agents of other firms to cooperate with us. Now, in broker speak, when we cooperate, we're not only talking about the transaction, but if you cooperate with me, then I'm going to cooperate with you and share you some of my commission. So it's an invitation to cooperate with me and my firm. You know, part of the reason for the MLS, I mean, there's several good reasons, but one of the reasons for the MLS, we are salesmen, and salesman needs a product to sell. What good is a salesman without inventory? And as a salesman, we may be salesmen trying to sell, but guess what? I don't have anything listed. So if I can only sell what I have listed and I really don't have anything listed right now, what am I doing as a salesman? Not much. MLS allows me, it creates inventory for me. I may not have a listing right now, but because of the MLS, am I still logged into Triad? Because of the MLS, I actually have 2,470 things to sell in my inventory. Is that a big difference than my 0? So this MLS creates inventory. It gives me an opportunity to have a product to sell. And like I said, the second piece of it is it allows agents to offer compensation, cooperation with each other to help move the product. Within the MLS might be various boards of realtors. So for example, the Triad MLS consists of the Winston-Salem Board of Realtors, the Greensboro Board of Realtors, High Point, Burlington, Ashboro, Lexington. There may be another board of realtors, but all those little board of realtors comprise together to come up with the Triad MLS. Up in Asheville, I don't know where you guys were before, but it's to my understanding, you guys just not too terribly long ago got on with Charlotte MLS. Kimberly, you're in the Triangle MLS. You have a huge Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and all your areas around. So those various MLSs kind of bring us together. As we've mentioned earlier, the listing agent is the one responsible for the accuracy or the property data. If you are in as the listing agent, you are responsible. The real estate commission does not care who put it in. What they care about is that you are the listing agent. So for those of you that have admin in your firms that put listings in for you, I would recommend, as a checks and balance, you have to sign off on it before your admin submits it. Because as I said earlier, the commission's not calling the admin with an issue, are they? They're calling that listing agent. Same thing with the local board of realtors. Some of you may, at some point in your career, get to a point where you're busy and you need help. And you need to hire somebody to help you for 10, 12 hours a week. It's not a bad problem to have, is it? Look forward to those days. You may have your unlicensed employee do your data entry. Your unlicensed employee can put your listing in MLS as long as you provide them with the information to put in MLS. That unlicensed person is data entry only. And again, they're not liable if the information is not correct or accurate. Also, as we said, you cannot put a disclaimer in to protect yourself. You can't slip something in there like contact DOT to see if any proposed road widening projects. My job is to discover those material facts. My job is to go to DOT and check that out before I list it. I cannot put a disclaimer in to protect myself. Working more and more with sellers, specific to sellers. That's what this section is about. I know a lot of this can be used as seller or buyer. But specifically working with anybody, buyer or seller. We have to follow antitrust laws. I think this comes up more with sellers. But we have to follow antitrust laws, specific Sherman antitrust laws. The big picture of the Sherman Antitrust Act is to prohibit monopolies. Sherman Antitrust wants a market where anybody that wants to participate can. And so anything that may allow for a monopoly in a market for one entity or one company to rule or dominate is what antitrust laws are trying to eliminate. Specific to real estate, and even more specific, I think, to sellers, one thing we get with antitrust laws that we're not allowed to do is engage in the practice of price fixing. Price fixing is giving any kind of indication whatsoever that anybody other than your firm dictates how much commission we should charge. The National Association of Realtors does not regulate how much commission we should charge. Real Estate Commission does not get involved with matters of money. Your local board of realtors is not going to tell you how much to charge. We need to be really careful as listing agents, because at some point in your listing appointment, the seller will look at you and say, how much are you going to charge, or what's your compensation, or what's your firm's compensation? And what we need to be very careful about is how we respond to that. Our response needs to be something along the lines of, my firm charges X amount. My firm's policy is to charge or collect X amount. Make sure we're clear when we're talking to sellers about our commission, that this is a firm policy. Don't say anything like, all of us here in Winston-Salem charge X amount commission. You are implying that we've gotten together as all the firms in Winston-Salem and have agreed on a set commission. And that's what we can't do. So be very clear about your firm's policy, what they expect to collect. Is there wiggle room? Do they have negotiations in their commission, which you are and are not allowed to do? Because by the way, the next question the seller's going to ask you is, can you reduce your commission? And how you respond to that comes down to your firm's policy. So just make sure we're not in any way leading the consumer to think that we've all collaborated and come up with a set commission. By the way, I don't know if you guys have heard anything, rumblings going on yet. There is a huge lawsuit right now between the Department of Justice and the the National Association of Realtors. So DOJ versus NAR, you may want to Google it later. Please don't do it now. But they're revisiting the accusation that DOJ is putting on NARs that basically price fixing. Sellers have stepped up to NAR and have said, why did we have to pay the buyer's agent's commission? I just hired one agent. Why did I have to pay two agents' commissions? And they have the support and the backing, they think, where NAR was collaborating and part of this. And I don't know where that lawsuit is right now, but it's gotten pretty big. And based on the outcome of this lawsuit, It might depend on how we collect our commission in the future. I wouldn't be surprised if the outcome of this is what they're predicting the outcome, that one day in our lifetimes, listing agents will be collecting commission from sellers, buyers agents will be collecting commission from buyers. And if that comes down, it's going to be the result of this lawsuit. I'm not saying for sure it's going to happen. I'm whipping out my crystal ball and predicting, right? Guesstimating. But I think if this lawsuit keeps going the direction it's heading, how we charge who for what may absolutely be impacted. So be alert, be paying attention. I know my firm brings it up every once in a while, some different updates and stuff. Again, you may just want to Google it to get caught up. I just ask that you not do it now. I consider that a distraction. Make yourself wait 42 more minutes and you can do it when we're done. So price fixing, more to come on that from NAR. The other antitrust that we need to avoid is group boycotting. Group boycotting is when two or more firms or brokers, people come together to conspire to push somebody else out of the industry, out of the market. Remember, we're trying to have a fair market for all, where anybody can come in and play. So if two people are getting together and try to conspire to push somebody out, that would be group boycotting, and that's not allowed per antitrust laws. Let's see, a good example. Let's say, let's go with Kimberly down in Raleigh. So let's say, Kimberly and I both have a North Carolina real estate license. Our license says we can do brokerage activity in anywhere in the state, as long as the property is located in the state of North Carolina. So Kimberly decides she wants to work the Raleigh-Durham area, and I decide I want to work the Triad. That's fine. We can do that. I can choose where I want to work. What Kimberly and I can't do is kind of come together and join forces to dominate or try to, keep one out of the Triad and the other out of the triangle, or work together to keep. Kimberly has just as much right to come into the Triad as I do to go into the triangle. And Kimberly and I can't work together to keep each other out of our market. Does that make sense? I can go to the triangle just as easily as she can come to the Triad. And that's where we're not collaborating. We're not coming together. We mentioned earlier, not calling, being very careful not to call those limited service firms discount brokers. That could be seen as group boycotting. That could be seen as a negative connotation to push them out of the industry. So that's why we call them by their proper name, limited service brokers, because that's what they are. They're limiting the services. This was a bigger uproar a couple years ago. There's a website that offers homes for sale, rhymes with Willow. And they recently started their own brokerage service. Once they got a brokerage license, guess what? Group boycotting. Now we got to say stuff like rhymes with Willow. You guys with me? We can't have any kind of negative connotation about another firm, a market broker that could drive them out of business. So our antitrust laws.
I'm sorry, I just got a question because I was
Please.
listening to you when you were comparing us, given that scenario. And why would someone want to do that? Like if we were working together to keep each other out of the market. So I'm trying
We could agree together to do that, Kimberly, but what we can't do is say, you can't come to the Triad, I can't come to the Triangle. Like we could, try. But if I wake up one day and say, I want to go against mine and Kimberly's agreement, dang it, I want to go to the Triangle and show property, you can't prevent me. You can't deny me.
Okay.
And that's what we're saying. You can't keep me from coming into your market.
Right. Okay, gotcha.
Yep. And what if you have a bad experience with a home inspector? Your buyer gets just a bad experience. Going forward, I don't have to recommend that home inspector to other buyers, do I? I can just kind of take them off of my preferred vendor list. That's fine. What I can't do is go to the office on Monday and say, guys, this home inspector, let's all agree not to use him anymore, or her. Let's all agree not to use them anymore. That's what we can't do. Trust me, If the home inspector's bad enough, they'll drive themselves out of the market. They don't need your help. So we're not going to conspire, come together and conspire. The other thing when dealing with consumers, again, specifically sellers, but also I think this could apply to buyers, is how we solicit business. There's different things that we can do. We can be creative to solicit business. Specifically, license law and commission rule, NAR, gives us things that we can't do to solicit business. So one thing I can't do to solicit business is solicit somebody else's active listing or solicit somebody else's active buyer. Before you guys were licensed, you went into an open house. What was one of the first questions that fell out of the agent's mouth when you walked in the door? What's one of the first questions you might be asking?
Do you have an agent?
Are you working with an agent? Are you working with an agent? I'm not being nosy. I just want to know, do I have a shot with you? Because if you say, yes, I'm working with an agent, hands off, right? But if you say no, maybe we can talk. That's why we ask. If you're looking in MLS and you see a house for sale, an active listing, hands off. You know that the seller has an existing listing agreement with somebody. That's how they got their listing in MLS to begin with. What about when that listing expires tonight at 11:59 p.m. and you look in MLS tomorrow and it says expired? Can you solicit that listing? Yeah, the seller doesn't have an active agency agreement or current listing agreement anymore, do they? So once it expires, some agents, that's their MO. They go after expired listings in MLS. We know the seller wanted to sell at one point, right? Why didn't it sell? I don't know, but I know it didn't sell and it's expired. So some agents, that's where they go. If it's active, hands off. Now, you'll notice here, this is prohibited per NAR, National Association of Realtors. This is part of our code of ethics. What if you're not a member of NAR? Your firm may or may not require you to join NAR. So what if you join a firm that doesn't require you to join NAR? Even though you're not a member of NAR, we still can't solicit other people's listings. Soliciting other people's listings could result in what's referred to as tortious interference. And this is the interference, the wrongful interferences of somebody's business relationship. So even if you're not a member of NAR, you don't have to follow the code of ethics, but you still can't solicit somebody else's listing because we cannot wrongfully interfere, tortious interference, wrongfully interfering in somebody else's business. Other soliciting rules we need to follow are do not call laws and rules. Do not call registry. If cold calling is how you want to go, if cold calling is the platform you're shooting for, before you pick up that phone, you need to get your hands on the do not call list. Because if the consumer you're soliciting is on the do not call, what have they said? I don't want you to call me. That's what we're telling people when we get on that do not call. And we've got to honor that, you guys. Now, why do robocalls and spam calls? Do you guys get like 2 to 13 of those a day? It's ridiculous sometimes, isn't it? Why do they not have to follow this? I don't know. I wish there was something there for everybody, but apparently there's not. What we do know is that us as brokers for soliciting business have got to honor this list. The list comes from the FCC, Federal Communications Commissions. There's a cost. I don't know how much the cost is. Again, if you're interested in going the cold calling route, you need to look into this. Maybe your firm will help you with that cost. Maybe they won't. The recommendation is you buy a new list every 31 days to make sure that it's current. Also, the recommendation is that we have an internal firm list. So once a consumer says, take me off your calling list, then we have an internal firm list of those consumers that don't want to be on or don't want to receive that solicitation via phone calls. There's some, we'll call them exceptions, if you will. If you are a buyer's agent, you've been hired as a buyer's agent, and your buyer is interested in a for sale by owner, you can contact that for sale by owner on behalf of your buyer. You cannot call the for sale by owner to solicit their listing if they're on the list. But if you have a legitimately serious buyer, the FSBO has advertised, they have promoted for those buyers. So if you have a legitimately serious buyer, you call on behalf of your buyer. Again, we're not calling to solicit the FSBO if they're on the list. Don't use a buddy as a fake buyer to help you get your foot in the front door. This is what we mean by legitimate buyer. We all have a buddy that would do that for us, right? Don't use that buddy. This is a legitimate buyer that's genuinely interested. And while I'm there, I'm acting on behalf of my buyer. I'm not there trying to get the listing. So buyer's agents can call when you have the serious buyer. If they're on the do not call list, they give me permission to call, even though they're not on the list. If they give me permission, I'm welcome to call. If we've had a previous business relationship, they used to be a client. My buyer's agency agreement expired yesterday. My listing agency agreement expires today. That's a previous business relationship. If they're on the do not call, I am allowed to contact them for up to 18 months at the end of our relationship, or until they tell me to stop calling. If they tell me to stop calling, I've got to honor their request. If I get a consumer inquiry, I call these soft inquiries. Maybe somebody comes to your open house and fills out your open house registry and puts down their phone number. Maybe they fill out the contact me section of your website and they provide you with their phone number. That's what I mean by a soft inquiry. If a consumer provides you with their phone number and they're on the do not call, we can call them for up to 3 months or until they tell me to stop calling. We've always got to honor their requests. If you have a personal relationship, you want to call and solicit mom and dad's listing, you can call mom and dad. If mom and dad tell you to stop calling, I think you've called one too many times. But personal relationships. And guys, please understand with the do not call, once they say, oh, for goodness sakes, please stop calling me, we've got to honor their request. Please don't ever talk to a consumer and say, well, we had a business relationship, so I can call you. Until they tell us to stop calling. There's kind of some safe, they call them safe harbor practices. Over on page 230, Tatiani, we're down here under working with sellers in chapter 9 is that main category. But just some safe harbor practices. Again, if cold calling is the way you want to go. So again, just be familiar with the law and the rules. You know, Google's almost always a great place to start, isn't it? Anything you ever want to know about the do not call registry, you'll probably find it starting with Google. The firm should have some kind of written policy about how we're going to be in compliance. Again, if they internally request that we stop calling, they don't have to be on the do not call list. If they tell you to stop calling, we honor that. Maintaining the call list, again, they say we need to update it about once every 31 days. I have no idea. Does anybody ever got one of these lists? Anybody know what these things run for? Yeah, I have no clue. Cold calling's obviously, I think we'll call it an old school method. I don't think as many of us are cold calling anymore. And maybe because of this list, I don't know. And then that last bullet point there, what do we document? everything. So maintain your records, maintain your documentation for making these calls. So do not call laws and rules. Gee, Julie, what's the big deal? Everybody does it. Who cares? Well, you could be dealing with federal fines, looking up to about $44,000 per call. Yep, $44,000 per call. You could also be looking at state fines. They kind of stagger those. It's like $500 the first violation, $1,000 the second, $5,000 and 2-year probation for 2 or 3 or more. It's not a problem until it's a problem, and now it's a problem. I used to say pick up the phone book, but now I guess we have to say before you log on to 411.com, make sure you're getting this list if you're cold calling. Questions or comments on that? The last thing to address pretty quickly is a solicitation of listings, the CAN-SPAM Act. This is addressing mass bulk email. You guys ever get email from somebody and you'll notice there's an unsubscribe link, should be at the bottom of the email? That's what the CAN-SPAM Act says. By the way, CAN-SPAM, just FYI, stands for Controlling the Assault of Non-Solicited Pornography and Marketing. We're trying to keep our children safe. Mass email, same thing with mass fax. If you're going to advertise and promote via fax, again, the rules just say that we have an opt-out option. We have an unsubscribe button. If they don't hit the button, but instead they reply to your email and they say, please remove me from your mailing list, we're going to honor that request. So probably one of the bigger what ifs I get. What if? What if somebody that's already hired an agent, what if somebody with an active listing agreement reaches out to you? You think that can happen? I know I can't solicit the business, but could a seller call and say, I'm unsatisfied with my listing agent and I want to know how I can get out, and I want to know how I can hire you? First off, I need you guys to document the heck out of that conversation. I need the date and the time that they reached out to you, because you may need to prove that they reached out to you. The other piece of this, we don't want to encourage that represented seller or buyer to dump or terminate their agency agreement. The first thing we need to do is say stuff like, have you talked to the BIC? Have you discussed this with the firm? We don't want to try to solicit the business, even though they've called me. So we still want to encourage the relationship that they have. If they still want to talk to me, then we can have conversations about what our agency agreements would look like once there's over, once this has expired or terminated. We're not talking about our agency agreement today. We're talking about our agency agreement in 2 weeks, 2 months from now, when that expires. Does that make sense? Or that terminates? That makes sense. If that seller says something like, well, I'm going to terminate early, I'll call you tomorrow and I'll be terminated, I'm probably going to want to see some kind of termination agreement just to make sure, just to be certain. So we went over some things that you can't do to get business. What are some ideas? And you guys are free to unmute. What are some ideas that we have, some things that we can do to get business? It's not regulated. What are you guys doing right now? Yeah, Tatiana.
Social media.
Yeah, social media is big right now, isn't it? Having a presence in social media, getting yourself out there. I don't even know all the platforms anymore. What are the most common platforms? There might be local market platforms are more different than, others. So being familiar with social media, having a big following. You guys as new agents have been out there friending all sorts of people, trying to get people on your to follow you or friend you, to help with your real estate career. Absolutely. Social media. What else? What else are we doing to get business today?
Getting out there in the community.
Yeah, community involvement. You know who's in the community? The public. You know what the public has? A house to sell or a want to buy, right? Or Kimberly, rent or lease, right? So the people, the public, the community, absolutely, that's who we're targeting. So you can kind of two birds, one stone, right? Get out there, not only help your community, but also meet people, network and meet people. What else are we doing?
Contacting like people you know, family.
Yeah. Yeah. Word of mouth.
Word of mouth. I think your center of influence is probably the best resource that we have. Again, back in my day, my admin days, I did new agent training and I gave homework assignments back then too. And one of our first homework assignments that I gave you, you guys do this what you want. Take a piece of paper and write 1 through 100 on it. And then go through and list 100 people that you know. Coworkers, family, friends. Because you know what? All those people that you know, they probably know about 100 people. And those people know people, and those people know people that know people. Do you see how big this just got really fast? I'm telling you guys right now, the first, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 people, that's easy. After a while, you start stretching and you're like, well, I know my mailman. I know my dental hygienist, right? But those are don't dental hygienists have to buy and sell or rent houses too? So those are the people we're trying to get you to channel, because it's not just about them, it's about who they know. I will say there, a lot of people don't want to mix business with family and friends. So I'm not necessarily, some people may like working with family and friends. Some people may have had a bad experience and said, no, I'm not working with family ever again. But remember, though, you may not be targeting your family knows people. Your family has coworkers. So I think your center of influence, especially as you guys just getting started, that's your best resource right there. Absolutely. Well, be thinking outside the box. What are you doing to kind of set yourself apart? We've seen billboard advertisings. There's still print mail that goes out, postcards, newsletters, that kind of thing. I know some people, sometimes we like to go to the mailbox and get something other than a bill, right? So a postcard or something may stand out a little bit. Have you guys seen ads on shopping carts yet? They sometimes have them on the outside. They may even have them on the inside. The first time I saw one of these, I knew the agent. So here I am at Harris Teeter pulling my shopping cart out of the thing. And I looked at my cart. I was like, oh, I know her. It was a very exciting moment for me. We can buy ads and promotions and various things, billboards. And then, of course, there's good old fashioned door-to-door knocking. If you're going to go door to door, always be safe. And if you're going to go door to door in a neighborhood or a subdivision, at the beginning has a sign that says no trespassing or no soliciting, we can't knock on those doors. They've already told us no. So again, we're honoring. Anything else we're doing to get business? I'm trying to steal your ideas. I mean, we're trying to share. I'm not going to steal your ideas.
I've seen a lot of, I've seen a video where it was like, you see a home in your neighborhood that's for sale. It's more than likely someone else is going to want to sell. So they start, putting like the flyers on all their neighborhood
Nice.
to let them know that, hey, I'm a real estate agent in your neighborhood.
Yep, that's right. That's right. Because you live right there, right? What a great place to start. Most consumers, whether they know you or not, most consumers need multiple touches. So if you're going to farm your neighborhood, if you're going to reach out to your center of influence, it's not just a one and done, you guys. We've got to periodically and often remind people that we're in the industry. So if you're going to start doing something like that, that might be a great opportunity to farm your neighborhood, which means you're going to send them, postcards. You're going to do, maybe you do a neighborhood event. Did anybody participate in your neighborhood's National Night Out last week, August 1st? Did any of your neighborhoods host a National Night Out? Well, gee, as the real estate agent that lives in that neighborhood, the next National Night Out is August 1st. What a great way to get your neighbors together. We're coming together for a common goal, right? We're coming together for safety and to keep our community and our neighbors, our neighborhood. Why can't you be the business, the real estate agent there that formats the thing and hands out your business card? I'll tell you, I'll share some of ours. I don't mind sharing. I had a teammate that did a open house a couple weeks ago. And it's been a long time since we did open houses because, again, coming out of this crazy seller's market we've been in the last few years, we weren't doing many open houses. So now we have to work again, and we're starting to do open houses. My teammate made a flyer, and the gist of it, the idea of it was a pick your neighbor flyer. And he went around to the neighbors of the neighborhood of his open house and left the flyer encouraging them to decide who they want to buy that house. Pick your neighbor. Who do you want to have live there? And he said he had more neighbors come to his open house, but it generated interest. It generated people coming to the open house. So again, think outside the box. Don't do what everybody else is doing, because you know what? If everybody else is doing, then it's hard for you to stand out.
I saw this other good idea too, that it was like, so you know how we normally, or some of us would give a gift to, new first-time home buyers or whatever. Well, so this agent, what he does is, instead of buying them something, what he will do is host the the, what is it called?
Like the housewarming?
The housewarming, yeah. So he'll reach out to the buyers and he'll be like, hey, give me a list of 20, 30 people you want to invite. And so he would pass his business cards to those people, because obviously they just help their family member, friend do it. So I thought that was good too.
That's genius. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. Anything you can do to get yourself in front of people, and then remind the people that you're there. There's real estate coaches out there. I've heard one of them say, when you leave your house every day, you put 5 of your business cards in your pocket, and you don't come home until you've given out all 5 of those business cards. So even if you're stopping by the gas station at the corner, before you come home, you are putting 5 business cards in somebody's hand every single day. It's a numbers game, you guys. It's a numbers game. The more cards, the more time you can get your information out. My firm just kind of got the coolest thing last week. We had a team meeting, and then at the end of the team meeting, they had a surprise. They gave us digital business cards. So I have a card in my wallet, and the only information on it is a QR code. And the person scans the QR code, and now they have my name, phone number, email, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, everything on their phone that they can save as a contact. All they got to do is scan it. So lots of things to look into, lots of things to consider. Don't ever stop promoting. We've always got to be feeding that pipeline. And if you ease up on your promotions, that pipeline's going to dry out. There's a common misconception in real estate that us real estate agents are either feast or famine. And the reason that common misconception, because we may go, we may have 4 closings this month, but then we may go 4 months without a closing. So one way you can prevent those gaps is by constantly feeding that pipeline. Even when you're busy and you have 12 things under contract, you need to think about what happens when those 12 things close. So we don't want you to dry up. Keep feeding that pipeline. And the way you do that is you constantly promote and advertise and let the consumers know that you're out there. Thank you guys for sharing. Anything else? All right, I got a question for you guys. Private chat. We see how this works? If you don't ask me a question, I'll ask you one. No, I'm just kidding. I'd ask you one anyway. All right, everybody ready? A, B, C, or D? Okay, so commission rates are set by, it looks like we're good here. The individual firm, the firm's policy. So make sure you're familiar with your firm's policy. Like I said, can you negotiate your commission? Do you have any wiggle room in your commission? These are things that we need to know before we start going on listing appointments and buyer consultations, so we know what we speak of. Let's do another one. A, B, C, or D? Okay, so do not call laws govern everything except snail mail. So there's no regulations on the snail mail we can send. Fax and email, specifically what those address is bulk email, bulk fax. I know we're not faxing much anymore, but the fax may come back. In some cases, the fax is a lot more secure than our emails. I know, for example, the medical profession has already brought the fax back. So again, without predicting the future, that might be something we see in which we may have to revisit some of these solicitation laws. Questions on this one? Okay. So let's talk about getting ready, preparing for our listing, our first listing appointment. And again, there's no, this is the way it goes. It could be the first time you go to the seller's house, you're going knowing you're going to get the listing. It could be you're going because you know you were in a competitive listing. Maybe you're in a competitive listing and you don't know. But each thing is handled differently. So this next discussion is just kind of giving us a basic understanding of the things that we need to cover. May it be the first meeting or the third meeting or whatever. Any meeting, listing appointment you go to, if I were you, I would have an exclusive right to sell listing agreement handy. In the event the seller says, wow, you're awesome, I want to sign you, hire you, where do I sign? I want to have that ready to go. You guys? Yep. So let's go ahead and at least have your laptop to do an e-signature or have it with you in the paper. I don't care. So as we're preparing for these pre-listing meetings in general, there's certain things as agents, certain documents that we want to make sure that we have ready to go. Listing agents, we need to do some homework before we go to this listing appointment. We need to do some research on the property. Do you have time to drive by and check out the neighborhood? Can you pull up previous MLS listings? That county's GIS system, school boards, NCDOT, zoning. Listing agents getting ready for a listing need to learn as much about the property as they possibly can before they get there. Ideally, if I'm doing my research and I'm preparing for this listing, by the time I get to the house, the only thing I don't know is what does the inside look like? Now I can go to MLS and pull previous listings and I can see what it used to look like, but it's not going to tell me what the current owner has done. Did they paint? Did they tear down the wall? Did they add a wall? But we can study previous listings pictures to give us an idea of what it used to look like. Little red flags could go up if we see major renovations, right? Because now we got to ask questions about like permits and stuff like that. So listing agents are gathering as much information as they can to get ready for the listing. So again, we want to have our listing agreement ready in case they say, where do I sign? Doing our working with real estate agent disclosure in the Q&A brochure. Remember, there's no set time for first substantial contact. So seller calls you and says, I want to talk to you about listing my house. Can you come over at 10 o'clock on Monday morning? And you say, sounds good. What's the address? They say 123 Main Street. You say, awesome. I'll see you then. On the phone and setting up the listing appointment, did we hit first substantial contact? You told me to come over. We set a time. We hadn't hit first substantial contact, right? So we don't have a need to do it yet. However, when we show up Monday morning at 10 a.m. for our listing appointment, is there a pretty good chance at some point in that next hour we're going to hit first substantial contact? I would agree. So if you're getting ready for that listing, if you haven't done it yet, be prepared to do it as soon as you get there. Guys, sellers are proud. And when you go over, it's their home. And when you go over to list their home, they're proud. They want to give you the grand tour. They want to take you around and show you everything. Before we can do that, somebody's got to slow this down and force everybody to sit down and have a conversation about working with real estate agents. And that's our job, is to kind of control that listing appointment. Let's everybody sit down at the kitchen table or the living room couch. I don't care where, but let's just slow down and sit down for a second and talk to the seller about things like, if you don't hire me. Have the conversation with sellers about material facts before they start going through the home and pointing out all the problems. Would that be fair for a seller, for them to walk around and say, this is broke and that needs to be fixed and this needs to be repaired? And at the end of all that, you say, I'm required to disclose that. Is the seller trusting you? No. Have these conversations up front. It's about setting the expectations. And the best way to set the expectations is to communicate. Let the seller know up front. I have to disclose any defects or major defaults with the property. Sellers almost always have some kind of seller disclosure. Most sellers have to do the RPOs, Residential Property and Owners Association disclosure statement. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Most sellers have to do the MOG, Mineral and Oil and Gas Rights disclosure. Some sellers have to do the lead-based paint addendum. So any applicable seller disclosures, all three of these we're talking about tomorrow, give you something to look forward to. We're going to want, when we're ready to list it, we're going to want a property data sheet. Our MLSs provide us with an input sheet. If you're old school like me, you can print the thing out, put it on a clipboard, walk through the house with your listing data sheet. If you're, newer technology than me, probably get it on your phone and go through. But it's important that we have a property data sheet so we make sure that we're properly marketing the property. I know what I'm getting ready to say sounds horrible, but the truth is, once you've been out and seen enough properties, you've met enough sellers, you've met lots of buyers. Once you go out and see enough properties, after a while, they all start running together. And if you don't have a property data sheet in your hand or some way to make notation of the features of this property, when you get home that night, you're going to go, did the bedroom have a ceiling fan? Oh my gosh, I can't remember. Because you know what? Some bedrooms have ceiling fans and some don't. So the recommendation is to have the property data sheet with you so you know what it is you need to get it ready for MLS. It's also recommended we provide a sample contract to the seller, something for them to look over before the first offer comes in. When offers come in, sellers generally only care about two things: how much and when can they close. Our offer to purchase and contract is now 17 pages long. As of July 1st this year, that sucker is 17 pages now. There's a lot more involved in an offer than how much and when, isn't there? So it's important that we start having conversation with sellers now about stuff like due diligence and earnest money. Anytime we're providing any document for a consumer to review or look at, we need to make sure that the document is one of those of the sample documents. Those of you that are active, you have a login and an access to the North Carolina Association of Realtors. All of our forms, well, most of our forms come from NCAR. And what within NCAR is a sample of every single form that we have. So anytime we're giving a form to consumer for them to review or them to look at, just make sure it says sample on it. So we're not giving them a tool to try to create their own contract without us. Does that make sense? So leave them with the sample, encourage them, start talking to them now, encourage them to have questions, because when the offer comes in, especially in this market, things move pretty quickly, right? So this is, don't go anywhere just yet. Make sure I have anything else to say. Okay, so this is about where we are. So tomorrow, what does tomorrow look like? Well, we're going to keep plugging away, working with sellers, chapter 9. We'll be with sellers all day tomorrow, you guys. So we're going to be there for a while. Tomorrow, we're going to look at our exclusive right to sell listing agreement, go through that, talk, like I said, more about working with sellers, getting into like seller disclosures, various things with advertising, that kind of thing. So the theme of tomorrow's is sellers. I actually think that's all I have to say for now. What questions do I have? Comments? Thoughts on life? You're 1/4 of the way there through 301. How's that? 0.25. All right, we'll start 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'll probably log on, 8:55 or so. So you guys can plan on coming on after that. We'll do it again tomorrow and keep going. Sound good?
Thank you.
Sounds good. Y'all have a great night. Don't party too hard tonight. We got to do class tomorrow. I know.
Bye.
Good night.